Good evening, everybody. Pete Morris here for the 1 year anniversary of Comanche Zooms. 1 year ago, we started this idea and it's taken off like wildfire. What I'm going to do right now is share the PowerPoint of what we're doing tonight. And there it is, and who it is. Pat is with us right now, and we'll be talking about her mother and herself doing this around the world race in 12 different legs in 1994. It's an amazing story, and she tells it very well. We heard it last night. As I said, this is the 1 year anniversary of our starting the Zooms, and when we started, we had no idea what we were getting into. It is it's been a work of love, that's for sure, and we've had a lot of fun doing it. And with that, I'll go back to our usual opening gambit here. And if you want to key your mic and say who you are, what you are, and where you fly, or if you just want to hold down the space bar, they can act like a mic key. I got to pay attention to people that have to get entered in here. Go ahead. Or I can start calling names. Okay, upper left is George Merriam. Who you where, what do you do?
Hi, everybody. George Merriam here, Western Massachusetts. Fly with John Futter. Got my twin engine rating, and I want to say 1968 in a Twin Comanche in Timms Air Park, Austin, Texas.
And right next to him on the screen is me. I'm Pete Morris. I'm from Connecticut. And tonight I'm talking from New Hampshire. I fly a 260, 1963's 260, and just had my first long-term adventure. I flew all the way down to Sun and Fun and back, and it's the first time I've actually used all 4 fuel tanks. I got 5.5 out of one time and 6.3 out of the other flight, and it was pretty cool. Total flight 8 hours each way. Next one up, who is it?
I'll go.
Okay, Mike.
Michael Saperton. I'm in Phoenix, Arizona. I'm based at Deer Valley Airport, and I have a 1963 PA 24250. I've had her for about almost going on 5 years now. I love her.
100 degrees today, wasn't it?
101 right now in my backyard.
Yeah, that made national news.
I know, it's crazy. It's too early.
Oh yeah, I know.
Hey, Bernie, I see you next in line there. Got to unmute.
Oh, he's talking.
I will unmute so that you can hear me.
Yeah.
It works better that way.
Yeah.
I have been flying at Comanche since 1987 when I got my first 260C model in it was actually up for auction in Northampton, Massachusetts, and I was the highest bidder for the single engine Comanche, which was in excellent shape. We got our first ride in it that shortly after that by the guy that was putting it up for auction, and it turns out that there was another Comanche also up for auction from the same place, and that's the one that nowadays flies out of Orange, Mass. What's the guy's name, Pete?
John Futter?
John Futter.
That's right, John Futter. John Futter got his Comanche about the same time as I got my first Comanche. And I got my second Comanche 7 years later in 1994 from a guy that was that had a hand control because he could not use his legs flying the airplane. So he had hand controls on this airplane that I got in 1994. and that I'm still flying. That's a 260B, 1968 model. And that plane has been across the country to the West Coast, Victoria, British Columbia, and also to Florida many times. And at least one time, I flew it to Galveston, Texas. Or maybe it was the other Comanche. Anyway, since 1987, there's been those airplanes have been seriously appreciated by me, my family, and my daughter Chris, who now also flies a Comanche 180.
Hi, Dad. Hi, everybody.
I
I
just
missed
see
the beginning of this. Hi, George. It's CJ in Vermont, flying a 180 and sometimes Dad's 260B. Good to see y'all.
Good to see you. I'm Pat Keefer. I fly a 1970 PA-39. So does my husband. Unfortunately, he learned to fly after we got married, so now I sort of have to share. But since we were trained by, both of us were trained by my mom, Marion Jayne, which you'll hear more about her this evening, at least we fly to the same sort of standards.
That's important in
So-
a flying couple.
It is. There was another couple we know that she learned to fly from her crop duster dad. He learned to fly from his commercial 747 dad. And then they bought a Mooney together. Then they tried to race together. They're still married, but I think it's more for the sake of the children.
Oh. Where do you fly, Pat?
Close to Fort Worth, Texas, an airport called Northwest Regional. It was founded by Edna Gardner White. When she was 67 years old, she used to race a 400 Comanche.
Wow, another story. Well, Pat Keefer, welcome and thank you for being our presenter tonight. I just want to drop one little thing in without taking the conversation too far offline. But today I got a message from somebody who remembers that your mother was a member of the Chicago area 99s. So I'll get that.
That would be true. And that would also be where I first joined the 99s.
Neat. Cool.
It
Well, everybody
was,
jump in. Oh, go ahead.
It was a great, great chapter. It's where Mom founded her first cross-country speed race that was open to all pilots.
We need to revive those. But hopefully post-COVID they come back, and we're looking forward to having the Air Race Classic back as well next year.
I hope so.
Well, everybody jump into any quiet moment, say who you are, where you are, and what you fly.
Dan Homiser, Kenosha, Wisconsin, and I fly a 1960 250.
Dan, pleasure to see you this evening. Thanks for being with us.
I see Pat Lee is on now, and Pat, if you want to unmute, you could give us a little update on your flying that you're hosting.
Yes, sir. Good afternoon. Pat Lee here. We've got a Comanche 260, and we're in Osceola, Wisconsin, and that's where we're going to have the Comanche get together and get to know each other a little bit, and just to see, have some lunch and to visit with each other. We've got the FBO. They're willing to put it on the AWAS so that everybody's welcome when they come in. We've got a nice banner and a lot of hot dogs and hamburgers for everybody to come out for. And the airport's KOEO. So we're looking forward to seeing some folks.
When is that happening, Pat?
It's happening the 15th of May. It's on a Saturday.
You're all over it. You and I haven't connected yet.
Okay.
Michael.
Okay. Oh, you're Michael. Hey, Michael.
Hey, nice to meet you.
You too. Yes.
And Michael, while you're here, if you haven't already done the who you are, where you are, what you fly, you might as well.
I did it before other people joined, I guess.
Oh,
Okay,
got it.
so
Yeah, no,
Michael
I'm
Saperton.
late.
No, it's okay. Michael Saperton, Phoenix, Arizona, where the temperature has hit 101.3 in my backyard. And I'm based at Deer Valley Airport. I fly a 1963 PA 24-250. And like I said before, I have her I'm going on year 5. I fly her every opportunity I get.
That the flying at OCO is on Armed Forces Day. We're also having a fly-in out here in the Northeast at Ellenville, New York. November 8-9 is the call for the field, and it's a wings, wheels, and for warriors that Blake Coon puts on every year. Fantastic opportunity. Saturday the 15th or Sunday the 16th for us. Pat, I think you're planning to do Saturday or the following Saturday. Is that right?
Yes, I didn't quite know at the time that we did it that it would probably be better to do it, Sunday as the rain day. And we end up putting it down as the following Saturday. I thought that was the best way to do it. But now to find out, it probably would have been better to go with Sunday.
Well, make up your mind and let people know. That's all you got to do.
Yeah.
Is it too late to change it for that or not?
Not at all. Go for it. Just let people know. That's all.
Okay, then we'll
Oh,
just
yeah.
do it Sunday as the rain day.
I think we just let
Okay.
people know.
All right, perfect.
Okay.
Pat,
so
I'll make
50-60.
sure I get the word out on Facebook, and we'll get a note out on Delphi as well, but it's now
Okay.
Saturday, Sunday.
Well,
So-
it's kind of a shame to sit there and start changing things around halfway through the stream, but okay.
Makes it easier to keep the food fresh.
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
And just so y'all know, there are 6 get-togethers, Comanche get-togethers that are starting to emerge around the country. Pally is pioneering. Actually, PJ Medella pioneered after calling me up and saying, "Why don't we have any of these?" I'm like, "Well, you're up for stepping up," and he did a great job. Michael Saperton, who just spoke from Phoenix, and then Michael Coffey from Georgia. Although that'll be interesting. You either fly into his 2,000-foot strip, or you can fly into a much longer airport 6 miles away, and we'll shuttle. And then another one in Florida, and I think I'm drawing a blank on the last one. But stay tuned, and we may try to get everybody to get together on the same day, and that way everybody should just reserve a weekend, and we should all fly our Comanches to get together. So that should let everybody know that we are definitely an airborne group.
CJ,
ahead.
this is Steve Schilling, otherwise known as iPad 2. And last week we were talking about shoulder harnesses, and you were looking for an STC or for the shoulder harnesses. I copied mine, but I don't have the website to send it to.
Oh, thank you for doing that. Okay, Steve, if you can send the STC for the shoulder harness to Piper 32P. Do you want me to post it into the chat window?
Piper 32P is in Papa.
Yep, 32papa@gmail.com. That'll get it to Pete Morse and who'll post it. But the other person, can I give you 2 email addresses?
Sure.
The other one is One Red Jeep, literally ONEREDJEEP @gmail.com.
One
red Jeep, as in Jeep Cherokee, or rather Jeep
okay.
Comanche.
I can't hear anything anymore. Too many years of flying.
Yep.
APU.
One red Jeep
One red Jeep
@gmail.com.
@email.com. Okay.
And that will put that onto the Comanche Docs online site, which is collecting STCs and 337s for our aircraft. That site has all of our service manuals, our parts catalogs, old sales brochures, all of the ADs and service letters, and all of the autopilot manuals that we've been able to collect. And they're all available online. they've saved people a lot of time and money, and their A&Ps a lot of time and money. So if you have a 337 or an STC and can scan or photograph, please send it to those people, and they'll join part of this online documentation project that's
Hey,
hugely beneficial to our type.
I think
Hey,
that came
CJ.
from, it came from
Marty.
Leonard's. It came from Leonard Spall
Okay,
down in
Yep.
Missouri. So I'll get
And
it to you. Thanks. Oh,
you are welcome. Thank you.
one
for
more
your
question.
help.
How do I change from iPad 2 to Steve Schilling?
I think Pete Morse is going to make that happen, but if not, I can. iPad 2, you are now, so there's a rename, and Michael Sapperton is going to hold us a Zoom on how to Zoom.
Okay.
And for now, you are becoming Steve Schilling. I hope it's spelled, is it spelled the German way or the British money way?
German way, SCH.
Okay, copy that. Welcome, Steve, and tell us while you're here who you are, where you are, and what you fly. And then I want Marty too, because Marty's got quite a story.
Okay, I'm at Charlie 77, which is Poplar Grove Airport in Belvedere, Illinois. Poplar Grove, Illinois, really. And I fly a PA-30. I've had it for 20 years, 21 years. And I'm a former corporate pilot, retired, old, still flying
Old
though.
and bold.
Yep.
You're one of our old, bold pilots.
There we
Outstanding.
go.
Hey,
Well,
Steve,
Steve Schilling with the
Ridiculous.
PA-30 out of Poplar Grove, welcome, and thanks for being part of us.
I'm glad to be here. You're a good sight. I was over to
Marty.
Cliff. I saw Cliff Lewinsky yesterday over at Freeport. I had to
He's
go
on
do a
our
little-
list to call. Cliff knows a lot, and we've been wanting to invite him to talk to the group this way if he's interested.
Yeah, he's a sharp guy for sure.
Yeah. And I'm
Okay.
tagging Marty Hench because I'm Marty was a critical part of the Trio Pro Pilot autopilot project for the Comanche since he's here.
I'm here. Hi, CJ. Hi, everybody.
Hey, Marty.
Hey, I'm kind of frustrated. I don't have an autopilot right now because, I was a prototype and I removed my autopilot so we can install that one. And I've been without an autopilot since October. And it's really frustrating. I want to fly my airplane with an autopilot. So I've been flying it, just not with an autopilot. Real quick, Steve Schilling had wanted to share that STC. What brand of belt was that, Steve?
He just went out. I just saw Steve Schilling left. So when he comes back in, we'll know. The
Okay, 'cause
two current,
I'm
oh,
sorry.
go ahead.
Oh, no, I just picked up a set of shoulder harnesses and lap belts, the Alpha Aviation, and I have the STC number and paperwork and all that good stuff that came with it. Airworthiness approval tag and all that stuff. And I just wanted to, and I didn't want to duplicate efforts if he was going to share the Alpha Aviation one.
Yep, Steve's, I believe, may be a Casola, one of the ones that we lost the STC to. And so we'll find out when he comes back in, like probably again as iPad too. You should have gotten a discount because the group buy special for the Alpha Aviation shoulder harnesses and for Phil Air shoulder harnesses, the two currently available STC'd for the Comanche is on. And I am the one that's been remiss in posting those. We've got them all negotiated. They're all written up. We have one for paint. We've got two for shoulder harnesses. The Trio Pro Pilot Group Buy V2 is on. And the LED lights, whether you need landing lights or nav lights or little dimmable panel lights, that's on at 18% off. And I am the bad guy. I've got to get all of those posted onto the Northeast's website and then Facebook and Delphi. So sorry, everybody. We have 55 people waiting for shoulder harnesses, and that is my #1 priority.
Wow. I actually got a better deal than buying it new because I got them used and they were only a few years old.
Perfect.
So I paid $500 for the harnesses and the hardware that goes in the roof.
Fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah.
And for everybody who's interested, the shoulder harness group buy, just because this is really a big priority. If you do not have shoulder harnesses or you know anybody who doesn't have shoulder harnesses, both of the STC holders have agreed to step up and support us getting these critical pieces of safety equipment. It's not, if I recall, the price is $905, including shipping from Phil Air, and that's for the fixed harnesses, and it's a bit more like 100 more for the retractables. And what Phil Air will do, because they've got a little bit of a backlog on their webbing, is they will ship you the bracket right away. So if you're going into annual, get that installed, and then the brackets, the webbing's a trivial installation. If you're getting alpha, they actually stocked up as getting ready for this group buy on webbing. So as long as you're getting any one of the 4 regular colors like tan, black, gray, or blue, they've got that in stock. And then their kit is maybe 100 more expensive. They do a little bit of cabin reinforcing, which will make older cabins stronger, because one of the few changes Piper did make to our fuselages is that as the type got a little bit older, or newer, I guess, from our perspective looking backwards, but the later models have more cabin reinforcement. Some of that came from adding the 5th and 6th seats, and some of it just changed as they went along, and I don't know why. So that's it. Phil Air is just a straight install no matter what you've got. It's a little easier and less invasive. You will get that bit of extra cabin reinforcement with the Alpha Aviations.
I have a question about the Alpha Aviation. I thought they're not as intuitive as I thought they would be to install.
Yeah.
They require some bending and ingenuity to get them in. They're not pre-drilled, which I was kind of led to believe they were before the group buy happened, by the way. But okay. They're not pre-drilled or pre-marked or anything like that. You literally got to figure out how the thing wedges in there and use your best ingenuity to make the rivets nice and straight. I haven't done mine yet, but I'm working on it.
I will pass that feedback. Good on you. I'll pass that feedback along to them, that if they could give us pre-drilled hardware and find out if the lack of pre-drilling is because of a change from model year to model year, or if it's just something that they never thought of doing. Thank you for
meaning to call them, yeah, but it's been a pain, and Bert and I both gave up on it. Figured we'd go to somebody who knew what they were doing.
Yeah, they provided a list of shops as part of the group buy that are experienced installers, and they're not all of the shops, but there's a list of about 40 around the US and Canada and the UK, if I recall, that are on that list. So as soon as I get this posted, that list will be there.
Okay.
Yeah. Helps to have someone to call.
Yeah.
Hey guys, a question on the shoulder harnesses. We bought them. We bought a set of shoulder harnesses, and it was the ones that you gotta take the ceiling tile down, or the ceiling down, and then put it up to the bottom of it. And we turned them back because we were getting kind of scared about it, because the headliner goes down and wraps up inside of the windows in the back. And to start peeling that all away, we're afraid we were going to ruin the headliner and not be able to get it back up nice and tight like it is right now. Does anybody else have that same problem?
You can get it back, but you will rip it. My headliner is 58 years old, and when Bert and I tried to pull it back, it tore. So yeah, but for about $550, you can get
a brand new one.
Get a brand new one from AirTex. Yeah, it's very nice. I mean, I haven't done it yet. When I do this final install, I'm probably going to go for at least a new headliner and probably side panels.
Yeah, and actually, Michael, go ahead.
I was going to say, we've got all new side panels, all new headliner. Everything's all new inside the cockpit, and that was just the last thing we're thinking about doing, is putting those shoulder harnesses in. But we just didn't want to ruin everything the way it was.
Yeah, you jumped the gun maybe on the headliner.
I think so. Yes,
maybe.
The good news for y'all, when I put together the first shoulder harness group buy, which actually it's not the first, there was one done by Judge Eric Sachs. It turns out the Northeast actually did another one 20 years ago, but I put up the cost for the AirTex interiors because many of our headliners are starting to get a little bit like they could use a replacement. And so if you have one of the earliest models, if I recall, up until like 64, the AirTex interior headline is like $150 or $170. And then the later models is the $400 to $500 kit. It's still not gonna, kill the bank compared to most airplane things. So I'll double check on that and include that when I get the post up. And thanks for reminding me to do that.
Okay.
And thanks for putting shoulder harnesses in. Yay.
Absolutely great idea, and good evening.
Yeah. Come and tell us who you are, where you are, and what you fly. Thanks,
George
George.
Groton, 8787 Papa, 260.
Good to
Savannah,
have you.
Georgia.
In Georgia. Good to have you here, George, and thanks for being part of us.
Perfectly clear weather here.
Yes.
I think I'm going to break in just real quick here and do a little sharing of the stuff that's on the website, because everybody keeps asking about that. This is the website, northeastcomanche.org, and over here, there's a thing called form links. And on that page is a link to just about everything you need to know. For instance, flying registration form. This has on it the one that we're doing in the Northeast at Allenville. It also has the one at Osceola. So if you want to register for those, that's where they are. We also have on here, there's a membership application. There's a Comanche Zoom registration thing down here, the shop, swap shop input and listing, which is on the website. It's not up to date. It's behind the time right now. And Northeast Cup order. And if you want to go to Oshkosh, this is not for ComancheTown per se. We haven't quite got it all figured out. But if you are planning to be there, they would like to know it. And this is how they find out. You sign up using this form, and they'll tell them that you're going to be there and when and how you're going to get there. So that's all that stuff is on the website.
Thank you. Close the door for me. Thank you.
And we got about another 5 minutes or so before Pat Keefer gets center stage.
Hey, Pete, this is Chris Burnley from California. How you doing? Comanche 260B. I had read that the vintage aircraft camping, it may be difficult to get everybody together this year. I don't know if that's just a rumor. And I even saw on one forum people talking about how to try to stage to try to get everybody together. You guys have any info on that?
I do. So the ComancheTown is co-chaired by myself and Pat Donovan, Zach Grant, Russ Wright of the Piper Comanche Facebook group, and then Kristen has agreed to become part of it. Yeah. Tucker Rice is our link to the millennials. So we, every year, or twice a year, we figure this out. We've been working with the folks in vintage aircraft, and we had a very good conversation with vintage parking, actually the day before yesterday, followed by kind of somebody else who wasn't really part of the core group talking with somebody else in vintage. So we're going to have to go back and rationalize those two discussions so that we don't create a mess. But at the moment, we will be able to park together. They are trying to be able to keep types together. There was at a board meeting, there was a rule change suggested that was suddenly starting to try to make it look as if everybody's going to have to come in and at the same time. And then I think when they realized what a potentially dangerous situation that could create, I think they've come back and done something very logical. So I'm not at liberty to say yet exactly what the final outcome is going to be, but after 2 nights ago, it was very encouraging. So expect ComancheTown to be big. Just as Sun and Fun had record numbers, I think they're used to selling 800 to 900,000 tickets. They sold 1.2 million in 2021. Air Venture is also looking to be very large. So we're gonna look forward to seeing everybody. And you may see, but the one thing I would say is expect to have a rally point at an airport southwest of Oshkosh.
Okay.
And yep.
On the forum link, for that a couple weeks ago, is it likely that we'll all be able to be together, or are you going to cap that out? And if so, when and how will we know?
We always want to under promise and over deliver. And so, and then there's always weather and mechanicals and people getting out of paint shops late. So register so that we have an idea of what to expect. We'll be reacting a little bit fluidly until shortly before in terms of what the exact area is going to be. But what we're going to encourage everybody to do is
up front.
Oh, okay, we're going to encourage everybody to do is to attempt to get in Friday before the show. And that makes flying in a lot simpler. And they're actually expecting to be pretty packed by Saturday, the opening day. So
Wow.
the main thing is if you can set up your calendar to arrive the Friday before AirVenture begins on Saturday. And then we're going to be just starting to set up ComancheTown a little bit back from where all of the very, very early comers are. And then we're just going to fill in our spot, and that'll be the heart of it. And they're going to work with us to try to make sure that we're able to stay together.
We
That's great.
encourage you to fill out that registration form, mostly because it gets you on the list of people to talk to about what's going on. That's the main thing. If they know you're coming, they will let you know what's going on.
Thanks for putting that together.
And we're at 7:30. So what I'm going to do again now is mute everybody and start the presentation. Jane asked me, Pat asked me to put up the what we're doing thing again. So I will do that. This is the plan for tonight. Pat Keefer is definitely someone who's going to be very interesting to listen to. And the story you will not believe. There's a whole mess of little side stories and all that kind of stuff going on. And with that, I'm going to suggest that everybody go to the speaker view, if you have that option on your computer. And Pat, take it away.
Okay, let me try that again. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Thanks, Pete. I'm honored really to be among the smartest pilots on the planet tonight. After all, we all own Comanches. So even with the newest Comanche being 49 years old, there's always something to learn. And the continual learning is something that I really enjoy, that aspect of flying. The most stunning thing that I learned in racing around the world with Mom was that we have an exceptional and fabulous freedom to fly. And as we all know, that doesn't come free. So I'd just like to say thank you to all the veterans that are on the call and all of the folks that are in active military service. And in my opinion, we can't ever say thank you enough for the work that they do on our behalf. The second group that I think deserves a whole bunch of recognition tonight are all the volunteers and presenters for the last 12 months of Comanche Zoom. And all those folks that work so tirelessly and support our type, CJ and Pete, and Robert and Malcolm and Bernie and Hank and Michael last night was very helpful, and Les. I understand now that there's 7,500 hours of Comanche information captured and available as a result of these Zooms. And this to me is what type support means, coupled with Kristen Winter's Airworthy Comanche Forum, Techies and Russ Wright's Facebook group. We just have unparalleled type support. So for all of those Comanche Zoom folks and ComancheTown folks, and I miss Pat Donovan in there, sorry about that, Pat. Before you go to bed tonight, would you just look in the mirror and smile at yourself and just imagine that there are thousands of Comanche pilots smiling back at you and thanking you for all of your work efforts. So tonight, as the screen says, I'll be talking what so far is the longest speed cross-country air race in history of about 21,000 statute miles. Now, for those who have not been steeped in air racing, it started in 1909 with a pylon race in Reims, France, where Glenn Curtis bested Louis Bellario using good race weather strategy, even though Bellario had 30 more horsepower in his engine. So we'll come back to that later in our own flying. Fast forward another 36 years to 1929, when there were actually 10 cross-country air races in the US that terminated in Cleveland, Ohio. There were 3 in Ohio and others that started from Miami Beach, Philadelphia, Toronto, and the West ones launched from Portland, Oakland, Los Angeles, and Santa Monica. 9 of those were open to men, and 1 was open to women. This led to women forming the International Pilots Association, called the 99s, so that we could have more races. If it were not for the 99 races put on through the years since 1929, Mom and I would not have had the experience to win the world race. I'll tell you, there is nothing quite like competition to polish your flying skills. If someone raced a Comanche cross country between 1968 and 2007, we're probably friends, and I probably know why they're either famous or infamous. And I chose just a few to share with you, because compared to Edna Gardner White, we're all latecomers to flying. She was born in 1902 and is famous for having more flying hours than Amelia Earhart when she was alive, and beating men in pylon races. Edna racked up over 30,000 flying hours in her life. She raced her 400 Comanche for a while, and once when she was on her way back from Florida to Texas, she was running low on fuel. So she looked down at a likely farm, landed, got some gas, and went on her merry way. She was just a hoot. And Fran Barra still raced her 260B at age 91. She was famous for having won the follow-on to the 1929 air race, the all-women's transcontinental air race, nicknamed the Powder Puff Derby, usually 2,500 miles in 4 days, a record 7 times. She was one of the women who passed all the tests to be an astronaut. And some of Fran's altitude records that she set during her job with Beech still stands. She was ATP licensed as a helicopter pilot, and just for fun, at age 70, she earned her citation jet type rating. Sue Folkering over on the Facebook group now has her airplane. There are more, and I know many more stories, but I don't want to slight the men either. Nebraskan retired Colonel pilot Harlan Haig was already famous as one of the 90 guys chosen to pilot the SR-71 Blackbird. It could fly the length of Nebraska in 11 minutes. He picked a 260B as his race plane and won many of the races that I produced, and culminated with his winning the Marion Jayne Perpetual Trophy in 2007 with fellow SR pilot Charlie Dobbs. His airplane is still flying. I believe it's in South Carolina. And Paul Hamer, who's now restoring a 180, I believe, raced with Harlan in the 1992 World Race in a 310. And I'll close this portion with the 2 Comanche family, the Louisianans, Charlie Horton and his 400, and his wife, Melody Horton, who has a 180. Charlie won the inaugural US Air Race founded by my mom and run by me, with Jamie Gonzalez as his co-pilot. When Jamie couldn't race because she was pregnant the following year, I introduced him to Melody, and the rest is history. So in keeping with the theme tonight of racing Comanches cross country, I'm going to go into the second part of the program now, where I'll give you a bit of the family background and hang or fly just some of the world race. So let's see. Oh, I can't start screen sharing now, but I bet Pete will fix that for me. Okay. So everyone should see now the title, Twin Comanche Team Wins FAI Gold Medals.
We got it.
Yep, we see it.
Okay. So far, so good. This race was a test of pilot skills, where the aircraft were equalized with handicaps. So your flight time started at the word cleared and stopped when the wheels touched down at the next destination airport. So now you have your time. The organizers knew the distance, and whoever did the best speed above their handicap won that leg. It was organized by a French company called Arc En Ciel, and they constructed the event, and they had also done the 1992 Round the World Air Race. In 1994, It was also the 50th anniversary of ICAO, and the FAI, Federation Aeronautique Internationale, was awarding the gold medals, and they are the sister organization to the Olympics. So that's how this all hangs together. Now, here are Mom and me. We were younger then. Mom is Marion Jayne on the left, and she was 68 here. She never used to say her age because so many people judged on it and thought you might have been past your prime, but you know, not her. And I'll talk about her aviation credentials in a moment. Mom's job on the race was to fly the airplane and, based on the weather, choose our altitudes. With 5,000 hours, she was pretty darn good at both of those. Now, from a background view, Mom was a self-made woman with just astonishing hand-eye coordination and a brain that was just as quick. Now, in his youth, my dad was a successful rodeo rider and boxer. It was sort of funny how he never really talked about that unless one of the young men I was dating was in the room at the time. Now, both of his sports required lightning reflexes and exceptional hand-eye coordination. Great characteristics for his future pilot's license. But as fast as his reflexes were, Mom's were better. Well, you might ask, as one of their children, how would I know? Well, we always had family ping pong games in the basement, and the final matches were always Mom versus Dad. We watched as time after time, Dad would come close to winning a set and Mom would just put it away with a vicious top spin cross-court smash. Now, finally, after 21 years of marriage, two momentous things happened in 1965. Dad won a ping pong match, and they both became pilots. Mom was 39 at that point. She got her private, commercial, instrument, multi-instructor, and ATP licenses and ratings in 5 years, all while managing the house with 4 teenagers in it. Not quite sure how she did that, but you know, the older I get, the more I appreciate that accomplishment. We've been told she was the 12th woman to earn an ATP. And she was a competitor from the word go. So air racing went hand in hand with these credentials. Now, as a kid, she was pretty sickly. And the doctors told her parents, as they raised her during the Depression, that being more physically active would probably be good for her and help her gain strength. And as fellow Chicagoan Harry Carey would say, holy cow, that was a bit of an understatement. At age 13, Mom, Marion Pollard at that time, earned her way to the Olympic swim and dive trials. She left swimming for riding, and as the marquee rider for our stable, she was one of the first people to jump a horse over a 7-foot fence, which is actually about 2 feet taller than she was. Later, she was a golf club champion, a top bowler, even bridge tournament winner. And so, like the women pilots before her, cross-country air racing was a natural pursuit. By the time non-smoking, teetotaling Mom died in 1996 of cancer, she had earned a record 26 first-place pilot-skilled air race victories. She'd raced around the world twice, landed on 6 of the 7 continents, ferried both a Mooney and a vintage V-tailed Bonanza solo across the Atlantic. She founded 4 air races, 3 of which were open to all pilots, and established Tailwinds, Catalog of the Skies, now known as tailwinds.com and run by my sister Nancy. These aviation accomplishments are what earned her posthumous induction into the Pioneer Hall of Fame and recognition as one of the top 100 pilots for the first century of flight, along with names you might know, like the Wright brothers, Lindbergh, Earhart, Glenn, and Sally Ride. She was amazing. Now, stepping back 52 years to 1969, I remember sitting at the dinner table when Mom and Dad were talking about buying a plane. They chose the Twin Comanche for its engines for business reasons, for its capacity for the family of 6, And they knew that once they retired, they could add tip tanks because they planned to fly it around the world. And that is how November 8855 Yankee, now November 3322 Golf, joined the family on my parents' 26th wedding anniversary in February of 1970. Very sadly, Dad died 8 months later, but Mom never quite lost that around the world flight dream. It was almost a quarter of a century later when she found the 1992 round the world pilotskilled speed race. She added the tip tanks, the Webco nacelle tanks, the Miller integrated tanks, Lopresti and Knots to Use speed mods, and set off with my younger sister, Nancy Jayne Palozola, to try and win the race. The normally aspirated engines were required to be stock, and the competition was just fierce. The toughest team was Bob Wall and Steve Nagorny in an F-33A turbo-assisted Bonanza with 100-gallon tip tanks. I saw those tip tanks. They were like whales. Our 15-gallon tip tanks looked like minnows by comparison. In this race, first place changed hands several times. Mom and Nancy had it for the first 2 legs, and then Bob and Steve won it. And so it went from Geneva to Helsinki to Moscow to Omsk, Irkutsk, Yakutsk, Anadyr, and Nome. And the leg from Nome to Victoria, British Columbia, Canada was a real lesson in knowing your plane and reading the weather, just like I mentioned Glenn Curtis did in 1909. The top speeds of the F-33 and the Twin really aren't that different. And Mom and Nancy's slot was to take off 45 minutes after the F-33. So the F-33 departs, they climb to 20,000 feet to be able to go nonstop to Victoria. The Twin Comanche takes off in its scheduled slot, and the Twin couldn't go nonstop, so they stayed low. So those cute little 160 horsepower Lycomings would perform well, and they stopped in Sitka for fast fueling. Mom saw a tremendous tailwind on the water. The Twin flew above the waves to Victoria and beat the F-33 that departed 45 minutes earlier. All the racers were just stunned. You have to be a really good team to win air races, and a little luck with the tailwind in the right place doesn't hurt either. The race finished with stops in Fresno, Frederick, Greenland, Cannes, France, and Mom and Nancy won second to the F-33, but it for sure was not for lack of trying. So if you happen to have the Knots to Use STC Twin props on your aircraft, you can thank Hartzell sponsorship and Mom for those. En route to Cannes, the right spinner about 100 miles out mostly departed the prop, put a hole in the windshield, greased the fuselage and the tail. Thankfully, a kind French twin owner loaned them parts to get them home. And when Mom got back to Texas, she worked with Hartzell to get a beefier backplate and the D-twist cruise prop. So they were on the airplane for the 1994 World Race under a 337. Now, I'd really much rather talk about Mom, but I probably should say a couple of words about myself. I was number 2 kid of 4 and 44 years old in this picture. And since my parents were pilot, I thought all moms flew airplanes. I learned differently over time. Compared to my parents and siblings, I was a wimpy kid. I was afraid of heights. I always had books on my birthday wish list. I did ride horses in the family business and won some awards, but I fell off and broke my right arm. And then a little bit later, I fell off and broke my left arm. So somehow I knew the family business was not going to be my career. I didn't have any more arms to break. So I wore glasses and braces and went to school and got a degree in physics. I think geeky, nerdy would have been a good description. Then I got an MBA and had a 30-year career at IBM. So I was by no means a person who pursued a career in flying or was steeped in aviation credentials. Everything changed in 1971. I learned 2 life-altering things. Dad had died 6 months prior, and Mom was starting a race from Ohio to Nicaragua. So I took a bus ride up from college to see her off. Perhaps because I was no longer a teenager, I realized for the first time that, gosh, Mom was really smart. She was an incredibly skilled strategist. And she and her co-pilot, Doris Langer, showed me that flying was as much about intellect and judgment as it is about controlling the plane. They won that air race down to Managua, Nicaragua. Mom taught me to fly that summer, and I was racing the following spring. My job on the air race was navigation, fuel management, and communications. Before the term cockpit resource management was invented, we were doing it. And oh, I should not have moved that mouse. Let me go back. And I am going forward for some reason. Let me get out of this for just a second.
No, you don't have to, Patricia, you can just type a 01 or a 1 and enter, and we'll go back to your first slide, or 2 and enter. Look at that.
Awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Oh, if only Twin Comanches would back up that easily. Here is our beautiful airplane. Now there's a ramp worker walking on the right, and you'll see that even in Okinawa, Japan, this was a head-turning aircraft. It is a PA-39 counter-rotated Twin Comanche number 10 with stock model engines. Now, you can post in the chat window if you know who built the first counter-rotated aircraft. This stunning paint job was designed by Mom, and I've tweaked it a little bit since that time, but I've kept the same basic scheme and colors. It is the only twin-engine aircraft and the only normally aspirated plane to have raced twice around the world. And you know, after a while, I really can't talk and show pictures forever. I really like to fly. So we're going to just hang or fly around the world really quick. So I'm going to go to, if I do this correctly, out of screen share and into camera mode. Bear with me.
Because all you need to do is stop sharing and your camera will go full screen.
Oh, there it is.
There you go.
All righty then. So I should be on camera now. You should all be able to see me and my handy dandy globe. We started down here next to Fort Worth. And before we ever got to the beginning of the race in Montreal, we had our first adventure. We were testing out the tanks because, of course, you never get anything done until the very last moment. And even though we had planned for 11 months, this was no exception. So I'd actually never flown with the ferry tank that was in the plane. And just about Bowling Green, I decided to check that out, make sure that it worked. And I was told we had 10 gallons in there. Well, that was not true. We had about 5. So shortly after we turned to those tanks, if you are running both engines off of the single ferry tank, yes, both engines will go at exactly the same time. So we were already in race mode. I switched the tanks with no conversation whatsoever with Mom. She hit the fuel pumps. She starts to set up the best glide. I'm tuning in 121.5, and by that time, thank the Lord and all the deities, the engine's caught again. So we made it up to Montreal, and on the very first leg, we had max manifold pressure and 2,700 RPM, and we raced 4 hours and 23 minutes from Montreal to St. John's with only 3 icing adventures and 1 gear problem. The next day, we raced 12 hours and 47 minutes down to Africa with truly scary weather, fuel issues, the gear worked, and this is what I call one of 4 survival legs. The longest leg in the race was from Marrakesh, Morocco to Istanbul, Turkey at 11 hours and 19 minutes. Fatigue caused enough mistakes that we almost met the Mediterranean Sea up close and personal. Obviously we didn't because I'm still here. But without enough oxygen on the next leg going from Istanbul down to Dubai at 15,500, we had adventures finding the airport, and I swear they only used 25-watt light bulbs. We learned a lot about politics and the routings that you could have through this section of the world to get from Dubai to Agra, India, which actually was an Air Force base, but we were allowed to land there. So it was easier for us to see the Taj Mahal. Coming out of Agra, this was a 23-hour day going down to Utapao, Thailand for fuel and then off clock into Vietnam. You'll see this little jog here. One of the air racers ahead of us could not get clearance through Bangladeshi airspace. And the word quickly came back to the rest of the racers that if you entered that airspace, you were going to be shot down. So everyone made a quick jog to the south. Coming out of India, and I'll talk a little bit more about this leg, pretty much everyone in the entire race got sick, and Mom was no exception. She literally could not walk. So I was the one who flew the South China Sea up to Okinawa in 9 hours and 4 minutes. I was glad she was back for the next 5 hours and 20 minutes going up to Sendai. There was a lot of complex routing through the mountains and vectors and changes, and we made it, but yes, we did have icing, mountain waves, and a mechanical at that point. We left Sendai and went up to Petropavlovsk, Kamchatsky in the peninsula there, 7 hours and 16 minutes. And this was definitely the most complex and provided survival test number 4 as we threaded our way through the volcano-lined valleys. The second longest leg was from Petropavlovsk to Anchorage of 10 hours and 58 minutes. We were very fortunate. The word across the Bering Sea is you either have 50-knot headwinds or 50-knot tailwinds. We had neither, and we were happy. That was a good thing. But it did stretch our fatigued pilot skill to the maximum. My all-time favorite leg, and I'll spend some time on this later, is Anchorage down to Calgary. You notice that we went northeast before we went southeast. And there's a story behind that. And finally, coming back from Calgary to Montreal, another leg of 9 hours and 4 minutes. It was excruciating fatigue flying into that eastern sun. But, you know, we had a shared personality trait of being too stubborn to quit. So we continued on and made it back. And 24 days elapsed, 12 flying days. We raced 105 hours and 18 minutes. I lost 24 pounds, yay. We crossed obviously all 24 time zones and 36 countries across 3 continents. We only had 2 arguments, which we thought was pretty good. And together, Mom and I won the FAI gold medal for the longest race in history. All in the Twin Comanche that my husband and I still fly. So let me go back to screen share. The technology at 1994 was considerably different, and there's enough gray hair in the audience that I believe most folks will be familiar with it. We had, at the time, major upgraded equipment for us, the brand new Century 2000 autopilot with a slaved HSI. We had two Narco Mark 12 radios and the Trimble GPS that showed you where you were with respect to your course, but nothing predictive about it. You had to guess at any corrections. And when you're racing, it makes a big difference not to chase that needle side to side or you waste time. One of the most important pieces, and Robert suggested that I talk about the ADF in last night's rehearsal. Most important pieces of avionics was the ADF. For someone who might not have seen one, it has a needle that points in the direction of the ground-based NDB, non-directional beacon. Or it will also point to radio stations if you tune those in. NDBs were major navigational aids on the world race, but they were not depicted the way you would normally see them on a sectional. So part of my preparation of our 40 pounds of charts was putting a red circle around any en route NDB and adding the Morse code identification. Because I studied these, when we actually got to Marrakesh approach, they sent us direct to Charlie Echo Kilo. I recognized that. I could tune that faster than I could reprogram the Trimble GPS. So it was a real benefit to have done all of that preparatory work. And that's something that you would not normally have had to do crossing the US. So all those things that spoil us today, ADSB on iPads, so you know where other airplanes are, moving map GPSs, onboard weather, not available. There was a whole lot of pull up your lat long on the GPS, mark it on the ocean as you were crossing it to keep track of where you were, finger on chart over land, and the rest of the time you were on instrument airway navigation. Now, before we do any more world race flying, I mentioned preparation. Even though we had 49 years of race experience and most of that together, we spent 11 months preparing the plane, the route, and ourselves. And flight planning included making sure the airway we would use or file was a two-way airway, because over in Europe, they have one-way airways. So you needed to make sure that you were filing in the correct direction. We filed the most direct route that was closest to the Great Circle Path. And another major work effort is what you're looking at on the screen now, and that was how to carry all that fuel. Weight and balance was one of our big considerations. So those of us who have twins, you know that there's 60 gallons in the mains, and we'd added 20.4 gallons in the nacelles, 32.7 gallons in the auxes. And no, that's not me misspeaking. That's, they stretch over the time. So we knew that our auxes had 32.7 gallons. Then we had 38.8 gallons in the Miller integral tanks, just short of the tips, and then 30 gallons in the tip tanks for 182 gallons total when they were all full. Depending upon the weight of your pilots and luggage, you could have a forward CG. So the question that we had was how to design the 72-gallon ferry tank we needed in order to be able to go max power for 2,400 statute miles. With all the experience that we had, there we were at the airport cafe. Mom and Ken and I were pondering this question. We all thought spreading the ferry tank the length of the fuselage would be best for weight and balance, until we ran the numbers. And here's what the envelope looked like. The subtitle to this chart is, "You're about to be a test pilot." It turned out when you look at that moment arm, the closer the ferry tank was to the nose of the aircraft, the better off you were. We did have FAA permission to be 30% over gross for 90 days. And then after we got the fuel tanks designed, which tank do you burn first? Well, you know, we're sitting there thinking, yeah, the ferry tank, right? Well, no. In those long ago days, husband Ken built a spreadsheet using Lotus 1, 2, 3, another thing that has changed over time. And it was just an iterative process to figure out which tank to burn first, because we were all wrong. It was not the ferry tank. We needed to start burning the main tanks down first. Then you would pump the integral tanks into the mains while you were running on the auxes. After you burn the auxes down, you would pump the nacelle tanks into the aus tanks. Then you would burn half the ferry tank, then the tip tanks, then the other half of the ferry tank, and then the aux and the mains. It was pretty much a full-time job keeping track of that. Now, you saw the picture of the Twin. It looked gorgeous. And of course, we might be biased, but we felt pretty darn good when we had a press conference prior to leaving Fort Worth for our sponsors, until we saw these guys. On the left, you have the co-pilot, Larry Choppy, and on the right is Ken Johnson. And behind them is Ken's 640 Kilo Juliet GlasAir III. It was the grand champion the year prior at both Oshkosh and Sun and Fun. So you look at that rivetless aircraft, and all of a sudden we pretty much felt like country bumpkin cousins with our matching Walmart blouses and catalog skirts and rivets all over the airplane. We had the oldest and found out the slowest plane in the race, but this wasn't about airplanes, although it had to be sturdy enough to get you there. This was about the pilots. So hold that thought, because this is even more spectacular. This is the Cessna Conquest entry from India, and obviously a most spectacular paint job. It was $500,000, and we were very thankful that Vijay Patsinghania was in a different class for competition than we were. He had a whole different race budget. He also had a Cessna Citation flying with him, with extra parts and extra pilots. This international competition was something, but you know what? We knew we had something no team from the other 9 countries could match. As I said, we had 49 years of race experience. We had amazing teamwork, and we had just spent more than 11 months preparing for the race, so we weren't going to be giving up now. On the first leg of the race, the departure weather normally would have us roll over and go back to bed. Forecasted, but not reported, icing from 6,000 to 22,000. And with MEAs of 6,000 rain and mist, it was not exactly a stellar day to have a pretty takeoff. We were nominated since we were slowest and departed first, so that all the other aircraft would fly over the top of us and we'd generally arrive last. Husband Ken was in Montreal, and bless his heart, he took an entire roll of film, no digital cameras yet, of just our taxi and takeoff. So love those Canadian controllers. As soon as we were airborne, they offered us direct St. John's, and I jumped for joy without hitting the headliner and said a very enthusiastic, yes, 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 please. And we got to our altitude we selected at 9,000, and we were between layers. I so wanted to call the husband and told him that we were in a safe place, but you know, no cell phones then. Once it became clear and sunny, I quit watching for ice and quit worrying about it. But suddenly, right around here, we picked up ice. And it looked like that. That little bit of ice on our spinner, and of course across our leading edges, dropped our speed 10 knots. Love that digital temperature gauge, because all we had to do was descend just a couple hundred feet, of course with permission, and get +1 degree centigrade, and the ice sublimated. Now, St. John's Tower was every bit as great as the Canadian ATC because they cleared us for a downwind landing with about a 20-knot tailwind. So Mom slows the twin to gear speed, puts the gear down, and there's no green gear light. Okay, the cockpit got very quiet. One definition of stupidity is to do the same thing over and over again, expect a different answer, but that's exactly what Mom did. And thankfully, the second time we did get a green gear light. What a time for the green gear light to pull a misreact. So we raced, and these are the results of the 4-hour and 23-minute flight. That was our shortest leg. On the one hand, it was great to win first place. On the other hand, you'll notice down here that we only did that by 4 minutes and 12 seconds, or somewhere between 1% and 2% for that length of flight. So wiggle your wings too much and we would have lost. The next day, crossing the Atlantic, and oh, by the way, this is when we are the test pilots for carrying 252 gallons in our Twin Comanche. That Montreal weather caught up with us, and if it's possible, yes, it was worse than the day prior. In St. John's, it was 100-foot ragged and about 1 degree above freezing, rain and mist. If we had to return, it was below IFR minimums, and we'd have to go up to Goose Bay. There was only one saving grace of the bone-chilling cold, as I had on a pair of thin cotton pants. There was a low risk of fire. So why would you say that? Well, our ferry tank selector had gotten kicked open and the twin was sitting in 72 gallons of fuel floating on water surrounding the aircraft. No time to fret about that. My job was to get that airplane ready to cross the Atlantic, so I refueled. In the meantime, Mom was getting the weather, and they promised a 10-degree inversion at 2,000 feet. The race organizer, in his lovely French accent, Bernard Lamy, turns to Mom and says, "Marion, if you go, everyone will go." Okay, so no pressure or anything. I'd actually decided not to race in that weather. Mom had decided not to race in that weather. We just hadn't talked to each other about it. She came out and said 10-degree temperature inversion at 2,000 feet, and we prepared to take off. We may have looked calm, but tension was pretty high, and we had the first of our 2 arguments on which way to turn to taxi out of the parking area. I simply asked for progressive instructions, and so tense I couldn't even smile that I had been correct. Lucky for us, the weather forecast was correct, and we breathed a sigh of relief that the gear worked just fine at Santa Maria in the Azores for the off-clock fuel stop. And then it was on to Marrakesh for another 5 hours and 15 minutes. We landed in Greenwich Mean Time, which if you're wearing 2 watches to keep track of these kinds of things was sort of exciting to us. You know, it's what things that pilot gets excited about. So we don't have really enough time to go through all the adventures of every leg. A typical leg schedule pretty much sounded like this. We arrived after midnight and I called home. We learned to sleep real fast. And then this photo is out to the airport the next day to get the plane ready because you just can't let anyone refuel 11 tanks. This shows the ramp side of the Marrakesh airport. Roses and fountains on the ramp. Pretty nice. So I got a political education fairly quickly as I used the video recorder to film the race planes and was approached by a machine gun carrying young man who demanded my camera. Okay, not something I had experienced in the past. I didn't know that that was a shared military airport, and I had just filmed their Air Force. So I showed him how I erased that part of the video, and gave him a Fort Worth pin because I'd carried those on the race. He gave me his key fob because you must reciprocate. And then he shared that his wife, as we talked, was pregnant with their first child, and he was pretty excited about that. And he actually said, I hope it's a boy because, you know, women are useless. So this is not exactly a time to debate cultures. I just said, I hope all his wishes were fulfilled. And after that, it was back to the hotel to study the route again. Then we would get a race briefing by the officials as to what countries would let us fly through their airspace. We would tour the local sites. We'd have a press conference in English and French with the awards. And then we would have a celebratory dinner with entertainment. In this case, since we were in Morocco, belly dancers. We'd sleep 4 to 5 hours. We'd fly 9 to 11 hours. And if you repeat that 12 times, you will fly around the world. It sounds so easy, you know, when you just say it. But the reality wasn't that smooth. This was our longest leg, as I said, at 11 hours and 19 minutes, and fatigue was already showing. What do you do for 11 hours and 19 minutes? This is my fuel spreadsheet. We always wanted to know where the fuel was in case we lost electrical power. We would know whether we had enough fuel in the gravity-fed tanks to make it to our destination. And in fact, right after we took off from Morocco, I always check because you don't exactly get winds aloft forecast, whether we're going to make it to our destination. And we were going to be 36 gallons short. So it's not like we can make a surprise fuel stop in a foreign country. And as an example, when we were briefed the day prior, if they told us if we had to land in Algeria, let me go back to map. If we had to land in Algeria, they told us to quick rip off any decals that had any French language or reference to the organizers in France, because, you know, France and Algeria were not getting along at the time. Fortunately for us, the winds improved, but really fatigue was impacting everyone. The GlasAir team ahead of us missed the airport in night VFR in Istanbul. And we were told to hold at one of the NDBs that I had diagrammed. So I was familiar with it. I knew where it was. Rather than take a lap, Mom reduced our speed and clicked off the autopilot. Even through the headset, I heard the airflow sound change and noticed that we were descending at 2,000 feet a minute over the Mediterranean with no reference to the horizon. I just pointed at the IVSI and she gently raised the nose. We did not have to take a lap, and we did manage to land safely, but that is what fatigue will do to you. Now, once you fly 11 hours and 19 minutes, about the only thing you want to see is a toilet sign. So I took this picture to commemorate the fact that before we got this far in the terminal building, we were greeted by the press and had to give an interview. But as I said, we're 1/4 of the way through the race now, and there were a number of difficulties. This is Carol, the co-pilot in the Oakland Express Conquest. She was in a wheelchair with a twisted knee. The entry from France, the Mooney, is shown here with Ken Johnson, the GlasAir III pilot, walking around it because they had an alternator problem. And they decided to scrub because, you know, Turkey's pretty darn close to France. And they didn't think it was going to get any better. The Tiger pilot was in the hospital with a possible heart attack. Turns out it was just stress, and he rejoined later. I should mention that Ken Johnson, the GlasAir III pilot, noticed that his nose tire had an additional groove in the tire because he was landing and taking off at speeds higher than he normally did. And the tire was larger and was rubbing on a screw head. So since he built the airplane, he was able to fix that fairly quickly. I saw a nick on our prop, and it's sort of like, did we bring a file or any tools with us? No. But, you know, one of the benefits of being female is I do carry a nail file, happens to be a metal nail file. And that's exactly what I used to smooth out that nick on the prop. The Spirit of Pacific Bonanza kept losing their electrical system, so we loaned them our handheld Trimble GPS so that they could navigate more easily. The Empty Pockets Express, I love that name, Piper and Navajo kept losing their heater, and at 22,000 feet, that was a problem. So everyone was loaning them extra clothes. And we couldn't keep their water from freezing, but we could at least keep the pilots warm. And our problem was oxygen. We could not refill one of our 2 tanks. Well, why did you care? If we'd been able to go on our planned route from Istanbul through Turkey, down through Saudi Arabia, over to Dubai, that's a fairly low level, no problem. Unfortunately, the Feast of Ramadan was going on, and we did not get clearance to go through Saudi Arabia, but we could get clearance. Not we personally, the organizers got clearance for us through Turkey and down through Iran. So the thing about going through Iran, during the briefing, the women's teams were told that if we landed there, treat it like a water ditching, announce on the race frequency, because it was likely we would not be permitted to fly the airplane again. Since women were not allowed to drive cars at the time, that didn't seem too far-fetched to us. About halfway there, I'm about to show you this border. The snow-capped peaks there are the border between Turkey and Iran. This leg was 10 hours and 54 minutes, and with only enough oxygen for one of us, well, duh, we gave it to the pilot. So there I was at 15,500 feet without oxygen for that length of time, and I was barely functioning. Without civilian radar, position reports was how ATC knew where all these little bitty GA aircraft were. So it sounded like this: November 3322 Golf at U from Kilo Whiskey at 12:15. Next, Mike Lima Charlie at 14:40. Next, Oscar Romeo Delta at 16:35. Well, those were all manual calculations. And at one point, I nearly reported that we were going to arrive at the 3rd checkpoint before we had arrived at the 2nd. So I was still quite determined to do my job. But, you know, I was slow at it. So when I was slow at changing, doing a frequency change, Mom reached over to help. I was so determined to do my job, I actually slapped her hand because the radios were my job. You know, that's just not something you do in our family. She said she forgave me for that. So I also wasn't as sharp on the approach into Dubai either. We got a very nice tower controller who asked if we had the airport in sight at 12 o'clock and 2 miles. So we were going in excess of 200 miles an hour at the time. And like I said, I swear they only used 25-watt light bulbs. Astonishingly, Mom pulled the powered aisle, raised the nose, got gear speed, and we landed safely. Did I mention she was a really good pilot? And she took care of her airplane. Here we are in Dubai, and Shell sponsored us with 2 cases of 15W50. Now, this is one of the oil capitals in the world. It cost them $2,000 to get us those 2 cases of oil. And you would think that as the person responsible for the plane, I'd be changing the oil. But, you know, Mom wouldn't let me change the oil the same way I don't let Ken change the oil on the airplane today. So I guess this is who I learned that habit from. We got another lesson in politics as we left Dubai to go to Agra, India. if you were going to go into Pakistan, you didn't come out of the Iranian airspace. You had to go south of it. The Pakistani controllers told us it was required that we climb to 21,000 feet. Okay, so I already said that, we knew civilian controllers didn't have radar. So we waited an appropriate amount of time and reported that we had reached altitude. Not exactly a lie, but not the whole truth either. So coming up behind us was the Navajo Empty Pockets Express, and they were told to slow down for race 2, which was our designation, because we were at the same altitude. Guessing at what the issue might be, they called on the race frequency and asked if we were a factor at that altitude, and I just replied negative. Now, Agra, India was our first daylight landing since Canada. And as we shut down, much to our surprise, something again that we had never experienced, hordes of people swarmed around the airplane. It was a happy group of people, but highly intimidating. So we stayed on the wing and waved until an escort came. In Agra, India, we were, so privileged to see the Taj Mahal. It's truly an incredible sight. The Taj Mahal was built by Emperor Shah Jahan in honor of his beloved wife, Mumtaz Mahal, who died in childbirth. This is just the entry gate. The carvings that we saw on the marble everywhere we looked was incredible artistry. You'll notice on this table that the leaves of the flowers are individually inlaid into this tabletop. The entire premises was like this. Of course, you must have your souvenir photo. This is as close as you're allowed to bring the camera to the Taj Mahal itself. And there is myself and Mom. We used hats to cover our heads because in the Muslim countries, it's frowned upon for women to have be bareheaded. So I still have my race hat. It's in the hall closet. And yes, it does have soot from being under the aircraft behind the engines on the top of it. But I'm not tall enough to see it, so it never really bothers me. Sadly, the emperor was determined that the artisans that built the Taj Mahal would be able to create nothing to compare to this monument to his love. So he had their hands cut off. They protect this asset by not having any industrial pollution like lawnmowers close to the Taj Mahal. So they literally mow the manicured grounds with oxen pulling bladed mowers. Everywhere we went, we had these wonderful welcomes. And these signs were actually created out of colored rice. So you didn't want to actually accidentally, open the door and have a large gust of wind come in. But as I've mentioned, fatigue was a bit of a problem. We grabbed naps wherever we could. This is the Cumulus Bound team, Arthur and Tom. I thought it was pretty funny that as teammates, they both sleep on the right side of their head. Arthur actually bought his Baron just for this event. Like I said, other folks have had much bigger budgets than we did. Now, by the time we were halfway through the race, nearly everyone was in trouble. And this was just the most beautiful luncheon after the Taj Mahal, very opulent. The teams, because it was hot that day, were pleased to have ice cold Pepsi served. At least they were pleased at the time. The ice brought most teams New Delhi belly, and it was bad. The race support citation pilot was unable to dress himself. He was so ill. They bought a blanket and a pillow from the hotel. They stuffed him in a wheelchair and he went to Vietnam in his pajamas. Nancy Law, seated on the ground here, is the co-pilot and was Dave's instructor. She was so dehydrated, she had to have an IV before she left India. And this is a picture of us at that team on the ground at Utapao. Nearly everyone was either sick in their plane or on the ramp at Utapao. It took 6 hours to get fuel here. And that's not for a lack of trying, it's because it was an assembly of a car powering from its battery by jumper cables to the fuel pump that was in a 50-gallon drum with a 10-foot hose. It had to be moved 5 times just to fuel our little twin 11 tanks, because there was no 100 low lead in Vietnam. You really wanted to get all the fuel that you could here. And then we flew off clock to Vietnam. And it was a good thing that it was off clock, because we had lightning in all 4 quadrants as the weather closed in behind us. So it wasn't long from Thailand to Ho Chi Minh City, but for us, it was a 23-hour day. There had been a long delay departing India. Ho Chi Minh City is otherwise known as Saigon, and I'd caught the air race cold while Mom had New Delhi belly, but at least not until we had reached our destination. We had an extra day in Vietnam, and my ears finally cleared on the last day. Mom was extremely ill and never left the room. And what my husband taught me about wilderness backpacking was to keep hydrated. So every time Mom opened her eyes, I made her drink water. She called me the nag. On her second night, she fainted in the bathroom, hit her head, got a cut just above her eye, and I woke up at the thud on the floor. I have to tell you, this was our very toughest survival leg. Now, if you think back to the globe, and one of the things I like about the transparent globe is that you can see right away that Ho Chi Minh City is just about as far away from Texas as you can get and still be on the planet. So there we were in a country openly hostile to Americans, because the press was at the awards ceremony and they actually asked, why were there so many Americans here? And it was not a pleasant tone. We had a sick pilot. America did not yet have diplomatic relations with Vietnam. I'm showing this chart because it tells you on the right-hand side the time difference to home. This is the how to find your wife chart that I left with my husband. Fortunately, he did not have to use it. But I have to tell you, when I looked at that chart in my paperwork, I sure was missing him. We tried to plan for absolutely everything. This was our calendar for the air race. The hash marks are where we were going to be flying. You can see that I annotated where we were going to take our malaria pills, where I was going to wash my hair, how often I was going to wash my hair. Now, you don't want to carry extra shampoo. And as soon as I got rid of, finished a shampoo, one of those little mini shampoo bottles, I threw it away because, you know, after all, everything weighs. And we know that for every extra 100 pounds you carry, you will slow down and not in our aircraft. So what we didn't plan for was for Mom to be ill. She was the kind of pilot that if she could walk, she could fly. Well, she really couldn't walk. Now, in theory, I was qualified to fly the airplane. Yeah, well, not exactly. I had not flown PIC in 9 months. I hadn't done a night landing in 20 years. I didn't have an instrument rating, and I had a paltry 500 hours over 22 years. I was a great co-pilot, excellent navigator, but not a lot of PIC time. It took no brains at all to know that we really needed to leave with the group. We couldn't stay in Vietnam by ourselves with a sick pilot. So after all, the day prior weather briefing said the typhoon that was going to be over the Philippines, hurricane in our neck of the woods, would not be a factor. Oh, goody. So I filed my first instrument flight plan and my first international flight plan. And I thought about what it would be like to fly an overgross aircraft. I had to clear my ears with Afrin before flying. And now with 252 gallons of fuel on board, because they actually found 100 low lead in Vietnam and we filled up. There's a real problem that the co-pilot I got outweighed Mom by 60 pounds. Remember what that non-envelope CG looked like? Now let's just mix in forward CG, high density altitude due to the heat, and see if I can get this puppy off the ground. So what do? Well, short field takeoff is good. It's like a 10,000 foot runway at sea level. But I didn't calculate density altitude because either I was going to get it off the ground or not. I frankly thought I was going to grow old and die waiting to get enough airspeed to rotate. It took so long to take off. I know the tall trees at the end of the runway grew, but I did get it off the ground and wobbled into the air. Now, a couple hours later, this was the view of the rising thunderstorms. And while we were flying, Mom was taken to Okinawa in an organizer plane in a wheelchair. It was about now that Peter, the co-pilot, and I learned that neither of us had an instrument rating. He asked what we would do if it was IFR in Naha, Okinawa. And I said, well, I'll fly the approach. So I studied the approach, and he really didn't know that I'd done a whole 2 instrument approaches in my lifetime with ATP, CFII in the right seat, Nevertheless, there was time for fun. I like this. About halfway up to Taiwan is my favorite intersection in the South China Sea. Sierra Echo Kilo, Sierra India, pronounced sexy. So you get to say, I'm reporting sexy. It's the little things in life. Now, as we approached the airport for landing, there was a night VFR. There was another slight adventure. We had about a 130-degree turn, and as we approached the island, Peter, in his quaint English accent, tried to get me to turn 10 degrees toward a light that looked like an airport, but I held my course because of what Mom drummed into my head about watching the instruments. Sure enough, as we got closer, Peter had identified a very fine lighthouse, but it had no runway. Now, Mom had been doing these elevator approaches, or what I call bonsai approaches, and I'd seen 6. So I was going to try one, and Peter had been flying in a much larger aircraft, and he kept saying, don't you need to be a little bit further out to facilitate that 130-degree turn? But I briefed Peter that once I pulled the power to idle, the gear horn would blare loudly until we slowed low enough to lower the gear. Well, folks, I was not as smooth as Mom, and I might have been a little bit anxious. So I pulled the power, raised the nose too quickly, and what we heard was both engines going as the hour's worth of fuel in the main tanks unported. Peter shouted his question, what the was that? And I shouted back, blank, I don't know, but we're landing. And the engines caught and we landed safely. At the beginning of the race, I was sort of uncomfortable with this French custom of greeting and kissing people on both cheeks. But I have to tell you, after that arrival, I kissed everybody in sight on both cheeks and probably everyone within 50 miles. We were reunited in Okinawa, and Mom and I were happy to enjoy this stunning view. This is the view from our hotel room. No wonder it's honeymoon capital of Japan. Although I don't quite understand why all the rooms had single beds. But hey, the music in the lobby was familiar. It was Michael Jackson's Billie Jean. Music truly is a universal language. They have the most peaceful gardens in Japan. And you contrast that to the most raucous celebration on the entire air race. So now it's time to move on from Okinawa to Sendai. You'll see our route across the left side, the west side of the islands and valley. Japan has 4,000 islands, so they're either using boats or airplanes, and the skies were full. Our route was lower, and when we were asked to climb to 13,000 feet, we politely said we could do that, but then we'd have to come down in 30 minutes because we had no oxygen. En route, we experienced our first mountain wave. Had we not reacted correctly, we literally at max RPM and max manifold pressure, we would have stalled with the pressure, even though we were 4,000 feet above the highest peak. We also had, and it's a little bit hard to tell here, but coming into Sendai, there's a fairly steep pitch coming down that mountain. As we were sliding down the east side of that mountain, we had one huge whack of turbulence. And as we checked our engines on landing, we found that our right inboard forward exhaust stack had broken. Luckily, we were able to get it welded before departure. Sendai, as you know, is where the 2011 tsunami came ashore. And where we parked our aircraft was what was shown on the film of that wave inundating the airport. They were so wonderful that as hosts to us there. We were very sad to hear of the folks that perished in that disaster. Now, to this point, we had won every leg in the race, but the margin of victory was still small at like 3 to 5 minutes, or about 1%. And we were getting more and more tired. So as we went along, we would add to our checklist. This is one of 4 pages of the checklist that we used throughout the race. We just knew that we were not as sharp as our normal racing selves. And as I said earlier, this was the most technically complex leg of the entire race. Another survival leg. Our briefing was very net. Yesterday, the weather was good. Okay, really, that was the sum total of what we knew? That was it. So the weather started out great coming out of Sendai. What was a little bit perplexing to me was right about here, where you see there are absolutely no islands. I see this, and I'm going, as we approached that, it looked like white sandy beaches in the Bahamas, but no, I became up close and personal with our ice flow. Not a pleasant thought if we had to ditch exactly how cold that water would be. But by this time, we were getting close to Petropavlovsk, and we were in instrument conditions. You'll notice how the approach was routed from the west side of that peninsula. That was so that we didn't fly over the nuclear submarine base. You can see that it was a bit challenging. You would see it better if you had the ONC charts. It really got a bit dicey. We had our second argument. I couldn't get the right fuel selector to move from the aux to the main. The prospect of flying that approach single engine was not good. Mom was yelling at me, I was yelling at her. We finally got it on the main. And of course, we forgave one another immediately because we didn't have time to do anything else. We were number 2 aircraft in a party of 4 on the one approach at the same time, and there were 2 others that had declared fuel emergencies behind us. I had the ONC chart and knew we were flying volcano-lined valleys with no way out of the valleys up to the north of the airport. Most of the other folks just had the JEP charts. Maybe it was more comforting not to know. We were so tired, Mom had the autopilot fly the ILS. It captured it at a 90-degree intercept, well beyond what Century publishes its capabilities at. So when the Barron team ahead of us missed the approach, We knew they were going to U-turn and come right back down that same valley at the same altitude that we were flying in at. So we descended 200 feet and reported to approach and got no answer. We called tower and got no answer. Back and forth, couldn't get an answer. Time to put the gear down. We were again well under gear speed, no green gear light. There was no discussion. Mom pulls it up and tries again. The frequency is crowded with racers announcing their positions because Russian controllers were not answering. Again, we got no green gear light. I am no longer asking for clearance to land. I am telling them that we are landing. No way we feel safe going missed, not with all the other race traffic up there. Third try, Mom pulls up the gear and it goes down with a green gear light. Thank God and all the other deities. We landed. It was incredibly cold and windy on the ramp, but we were incredibly happy to be on the ground. I sent Mom to the hotel and got the airplane fueled, and all of the racers landed safely. There was a near collision as the Baron and the 421 were on the approach on the same runway at the same time. The 421, as they broke out of the overcast, sidestepped to the parallel runway when they saw the Baron, and both landed safely. But scary to see on the ground. Again, I used backpacking skills as I shivered in an unheated car waiting to get transported to the lodge. I took off my shoes and socks and warmed my frozen feet with my hands. We lost this leg to the GlasAir team that had landed in VFR conditions, but we enjoyed the spectacular scenery the next day. In the upper left-hand corner, you see the snow-capped volcano. Awesome vistas, but it was a regular box canyon. This 14er was close and directly on our route, so it's hard to say if we would be able to climb out on a direct course for the second longest leg of 10 hours and 58 minutes. Again, we had really bad weather going into Anchorage, and we lost this leg too. But it was great to be on home turf where we could at least understand the language of the folks at customs. And as I said, in my third of the century of racing, this is my all-time favorite race leg. This was our forte, daylight VFR racing, dead reckoning over land. Our strategy was radical, but based on Mom's Alaskan experience in the 1992 race. Headwinds were forecast until we crossed the Continental Divide. Icing was forecast, and we had to climb over 14,000-foot mountains immediately. Not a good flight profile for 160 horsepower engines. It was a great flight profile for the GlasAir III that secretly I think of a mosquito with an engine attached. It felt like a punch to the gut when we found out that the GlasAir team took off while we were still sleeping at 3 a.m. We wondered what they knew that we didn't know. Mom's strategy was to stay low and fly around the mountains. We added more than 100 nautical miles to the route, but since moving maps weren't here yet, we could gain time with my dead reckoning navigation. It worked. We had no winds to tailwinds the entire route and stayed at 9,500 feet. In contrast, the GlasAir had headwinds and they iced. We won by an astonishing 25 minutes, 5 times any of the other margins that we won by. I love this leg because it was the teamwork of Mom's strategy and my execution that earned us that huge margin. And now we're headed for home, headed for the barn. All we had to do was finish now, but that was really harder than it sounds. We were so tired. On pre-flight run-up, Mom actually feathered the mixture instead of the prop control, and she was so slow at figuring it out that the engine died and had to be restarted. Just unheard of in our history of flying together. It was east into the morning sun and light chop above a broken layer, nearly the whole route. At 6 of the 9 hours into the flight, we were starting to fall asleep. Yep, falling asleep at the controls. We tried a little movement and attempted some patty cake, but we didn't have enough coordination to make that work. Then I missed a tank change on the right engine, and a submarine, the tack drive reverser for the counter-rotated engine. The prop was clearly running, and sometimes the tack needle would flop around. It was very distracting, but hey, it was keeping me awake. Mom's last bit of great strategy came from anticipating ATC routing. Now, Canadian controllers, as I said, had been giving us direct routings, which again were rare in 1994, everywhere around their country, and many racers had come to expect it and filed that way. What we recognized is that between Calgary and Saint-Hubert Airport was Montreal International. No way were we going to be cleared through that airspace at max speed, so Mom filed the instrument arrival gate at Saint-Hubert, even though we were in VFR conditions. One after another, racers ahead of us got last-minute deviations, and they were not pleased. I have to tell you, we rarely spoke to one another during the last 10 minutes of any flight, but this was different. Both of us were nearly hyperactively talking and checking each other, checking the heading to the runway, checking the correct turn, checking our speed, checking our fuel quantity in the mains, checking the fuel pumps on, checking the gear down speed, and hallelujah, we had a green gear light. The fatigue was gone now. We'd made it. And I'm here to tell you that yes, you can taxi and hug at the same time. Ken was there waiting for us, and we group hug our excitement at the safe arrival. We were bouncing off the ramp and with excitement during the TV interview. As I look back at this incredible experience, the survival tests, I still have some disbelief that me, that nerdy, skinny, fearful child, could really do this. We used every bit of luck people had wished us and borrowed some from the future. I'm so thankful Piper built the Twin Comanche as sturdily as they did. It definitely reinforces that flying is as much about intellect and judgment as it is about controlling the plane. That skill and preparation and teamwork can overcome having the slowest and oldest plane in the competition, our trusty Twin Comanche. We were delighted and very happy to bring good press for general aviation for a change, and did interviews for AM Canada, the Today Show, CBS, NBC, and even CNN picked up the feed as well. So you all have been very quiet. Of course, Pete has you muted, so everyone is quiet, but you have been very patient. And I want to say thank you in the language of the countries in which we landed. Merci, Tashakar, Shazmar, Dandawar, Kamun, Arigato, Spasible, thank you, and from Texas, thanks y'all. And I will be happy to take any questions as I have stopped sharing. Oh, there are still people out there, yay, and they're awake. What would you like to know?
This is CJ. I'm just going to read a comment from the chat window. That was a truly amazing accomplishment. I can't fathom making such a trip. Thanks for sharing your insight. And everybody, in this case, feel free to just unmute into any quiet space and put in your questions and comments.
Did anybody respond to who built the first counter-rotated aircraft?
Yeah, I did. Wright brothers.
Oh, there you go. Somebody else that knew that bit of trivia.
Wright brothers, original flyer.
Yes, counter-rotated the other way, but then again, they were allowed to use things like door springs and didn't have to get FAA approval for it.
And
but,
bicycle chains.
No shoulder harnesses, so not as safe as what we fly today.
Pat, a question from the chat window. When is your next race?
When is my next race? Well, it's probably not in the cards for the future. My wonderful and very patient husband did air race with me, and we did have some victories, but he just didn't quite enjoy it as much as Mom did. So after 1996, when Mom passed, I actually ran the air races, which is almost, but not quite as good as racing yourself. So for about a decade there, I organized air races for other people all across the United States. And that's the shirt that I have on today. If I sit up really straight, you can see the National Air Races by US Air Race Inc. That was the company that I was president of. And like you, CJ, gathered a whole bunch of volunteers, generally recruited about 200 people a year as we hopscotched across the country. And everybody just loves airplanes. So very pleased to have been involved in that and been able to stay in touch with many of the air racers that we raced around the world with.
200 volunteers year after year is quite the testament to how much fun people must have had supporting air racing.
Oh, absolutely. Folks, we went to 81 different airports in the US and also Thunder Bay in Canada. And I think we hit 42 states in 10 years. And of course, you know, somebody had to pre-fly the race routes. So, oh, shame. I had to fly the Twin.
Man, tough job, but someone had to do it.
Exactly.
A couple more questions. From one person, how often are you flying these days?
We do our best to fly every week. We all know that the worst enemy of engines is idleness. And so whether we have someplace to go or not, we fly. And being that we're both over 70, we are very cognizant of the CDC guidelines. And we have been socially distant for some time, and flying is a socially distant activity. However, you know, the reason I'm taking pictures of rivers and posting it on the Facebook page is because that's pretty much all the flying we're doing. We depart 5-2 Fox, we go to Oklahoma, we go to Western Texas, and we land at 5-2 Fox. And that's the flying that we've been doing lately. But we do literally get out every week, weather permitting.
Cool. What was the, another question, what was the lowest fuel remaining after landing that you experienced in your years of air racing?
Okay. I was going to answer it for the world race because there was a good discussion on Facebook the other day, and then I'll answer the question about running tanks dry or running them very low. As you heard, when we were en route from Fort Worth to Montreal, we had both engines go at the same time. So I got a little more hesitant to running tanks to like about 1 gallon. And of course, we have a digital fuel computer in the airplane. So when we landed in Istanbul, which was the longest leg, we had 22 gallons on board. However, there were 2 gallons in 11 tanks. That doesn't do you a whole lot of good. So after that, I got smarter with fuel management. And when one tank got close to being empty, I would switch one of the engines to the other one, to the next tank, and then I would go back and run it down more. And so we had no engine stoppages other than dramatic flying technique of hauling back on the yoke just after you've pulled the power. And then the missed fuel tank change. But at no point in time did we ever lose the engine. The lowest amount of fuel that we ever arrived at a destination with was in a borrowed PA-30B, which of course was faster than the 39, and this was a factor in some of the races, taking off from Meridian, Mississippi. Now, in those days, you only have a cylinder head temperature gauge on your number 3 cylinder, right? So if one of the other 3 cylinders has perhaps swallowed a valve, how do you know? Well, you go slow. Well, we had a headwind. Oh my gosh. So we have a headwind, but Mom is going, I can't really quite get the props synced. There's something wrong. So we had this headwind. We expected to be slow. And finally, we're going from Meridian, Mississippi to Jacksonville, Florida. And I said, Mom, we need to climb and lean more than flying on the deck and burning close to 30 gallons an hour. And we did climb. And then when we filled those tanks, now remember that your aux tanks stretch a little bit. So we probably had more than 84 gallons on board to start with, but when we fueled with 84.5. Not something we ever did again. CJ, you're muted if you have any more questions.
I do, and I apologize. Yep. So another one from a fellow around the worlder in a stock 180, Chris Elger.
Hi, Chris.
What was your total time?
What was the total time?
Away from
It's
start
Chris
to
here.
finish?
What was your total time away? Like you went around the world in a race, but what from the time you left Texas to when you got back?
We left, if memory serves, on April 29th, and we returned on May 26th. So we were in Montreal on April 29th and 30th. We departed on May 1st. We returned on May 24th. We celebrated on May 25th, and we were home on May 26th.
Wow, amazing.
Yeah, that's why I say, I look back and I go, really? You did that? But I'm 71 now. I was younger then.
Yeah, good job. You were younger then.
And as Mom said, she couldn't have done it without me, and I would say I could not have done it without her. I was very fortunate to have had that time with her, because it was only 2 years later that she passed of cancer.
Oh,
Too bad.
It was pretty shocking for someone who never smoked or drank, and her sister, who was 5 years older, came down to visit. Well, it was 79 days from diagnosis to death, and Mom's going, well, actually her sister said it. She says, Marion, you just do everything fast. And her older sister is going, I don't understand why I smoked and drank to excess all of my life, and you're the one dying of cancer. It's pretty funny to unintentionally eavesdrop on their conversation. We lived 4 blocks down the road, but during that 79 days, I moved in with Mom and took care of her during that time. And all she really wanted from people was, funny cards to make her laugh.
what a remarkable and amazing person.
A good example, and if I have to die, I'm going to have to die at some point. She set a good example on how to do it graciously and in good humor. And I'll tell this story because I think it speaks to her character. Everyone knew that she was dying, and she had flown in each of the family and all of her grandchildren so that she could say goodbye. That's the advantage of cancer. The disadvantage is, of course, it hurts like hell. So the night before she dies, my sister from Chicago had flown in to give me relief for the weekend. And her youngest son calls and reports in that he's home from school. And he knows that his mother is there to help his grandmother, who he loves dearly, through this transition to death, and he starts to cry. Now, by this time, Mom had a lot of opioids in her system. And she generally whispered, had maybe 20 good minutes a day. But she reaches out her hand for the phone. And somehow she finds her normal voice. And she says, Jonathan, she lectures him. I want you to be happy for me. I'm going to be free from pain. And I'm going to see your grandfather, who you never met, but I still love and have missed for 26 years. So you should be happy for me. And she hands the phone back. And that night she died in her sleep. I have to say, I just couldn't have any better example than that on how to die.
I know you've touched all of us with that story and that example and the memories that you created together. There are some others questions. Well, one is, where in Texas are you?
Oh, north, let's see, we're under the Class B airspace for DFW in the northwest area. If you're familiar with Alpha Foxtrot Whiskey Alliance Alliance Airfield is 6 miles from our 5-2 Fox. And I know I mentioned it last night. I can't remember if I mentioned it this evening, that airport was founded by Edna Gardner White when she was 67 years old. So it's sort of fun that it was founded by a 400 Comanche owner. And she's since passed, but that's where we keep the aircraft. So not under the 2000 ring, but under the 3000 ring from DFW to the northwest.
Gotcha. Tango Whiskey Charlie, how close is that to Tango 56 where you're based?
5-2 Fox is where we're based. And Tango 67?
Tango 5-6, it's Eagle's Nest.
Awesome.
Midway, I didn't know you were so close.
Do you guys know each other?
No.
Not met.
We do now, we're waving.
Yeah, I'm Troy. Troy. Good to meet you. Great,
Hi,
great
Troy,
present.
nice. Pardon me?
No, excellent. Thank you.
Oh,
Charlie, you
so
broke
sweet.
up. He was trying to say great presentation.
Oh, twist my arm, hanger fly, you know? I think everyone could do the same about their flying adventures.
Yours are pretty dramatic. There was a question about what was the ratio of sponsor money to your own financing?
Oh, gosh. That's another one of those questions that Mom would never answer. You don't really want to know how much did it cost you to race around the world, because the joy and the ability to positively contribute to general aviation's reputation just far outweighs the economics. But if I had to say, I'd say it was probably 50-50. The entry fee was $50,000. And
oh my God.
We had things like, Century sponsored us with a new autopilot and an HSI and the installation. Homing had sponsored Mom, not in this race, but 2-for-1 new engines for the 1992 race. And oh, by the way, in Mom's opinion, the peak performance is right around 200 hours on fresh engines. She said they were a little bit faster in 94 than they were in 92. Lopresti had helped out with their speed mods where they could. Let's see, what else did we have on the airplane? As I said, Aeroshell was pretty shocked. Mom just asked for a couple cases of 15W50. The guy had no idea it was going to cost him $2,000. But, we got it, and it was important to the health of the engines. You're muted again. I see your mouth moving though, CJ.
I apologize. It's a habit to
Oh, no problem.
to push the big meetings, push to talk switches. I am so bad as the moderator. Other questions include, what were some of the best speed and efficiency tricks you found while racing?
Best speed and efficiency tricks. Well, first of all, fuel. The more fuel on board you have, the fewer stops you need to make. In terms of speed and efficiency, winds aloft is after fuel. Winds aloft is number 2. At my mom's memorial service in Chicago, she asked to have one here and one in Chicago, so her sister didn't have to travel again. We did a little bit of open mic on Marion stories. So one of the folks who had traveled with her to a 99 convention in Anchorage, Alaska, said, Marion was all about flying it where the winds were good. And if that meant turbulence, well, so be it. And she just got accustomed to the fact that I didn't like turbulence. And one day she, pre-flight and said, we're going to be flying 3,500. It's going to be rough. Here's the 6-stack. And that's how people remembered her at her memorial service. So winds are number 2. Number 3, I would put rigging of the aircraft. I use the unscientific method of is the aircraft flying straight or crooked? Whenever I clean the bugs off the airplane, I've been known to count how many are on the right side of the vertical stabilator and on the left side of the tail. And if it's roughly even, then I know that we're in pretty good rigging. Now, beyond that, obviously the health of your engine, keeping it clean, flying it, leaning it properly. Now, we lean in the olden days, it's sort of like lean it until the engine runs rough and then push it back a little bit. That's all the technology that we have. Don't let the CHTs go over 450. And but now with the JPI and the ability to do lean fine, you pretty well know how much you're running rich of peak. And we do run 75 rich of peak. Been flying that way so long. Lycoming engine is very happy with that. Lycoming is very happy with that. And there you go. Those are my top tips for flying fast and flying efficiently. Oh, and stay on course. That's another good one.
I did not ever think in a Comanche Zoom to hear a count the bugs on either side. That is the best tip ever.
It's very low tech,
So it's count the bugs on either side of the what again, Pat?
Of your tail. Not on the stabilator.
Okay.
On the vertical piece of your tail. If your aircraft is flying straight, you should have the same number of bugs on both sides. If you don't, something's up. Now with a twin engine aircraft, it could always be, well, you didn't have the props synced or something like that. I've also been known to take our Hartzell strobe and go up and check and make sure that what we're reading on the tack gauge is actually what the propellers are producing. So I'm pretty anal when it comes to numbers. I think it's the physics thing.
So when you, and forgive me, there's another question behind this one, but when you discover that you have uneven numbers of bugs, what do you then go and check?
Well, first of all, I think about where we were flying. if we had spent a fair amount of time in a significant crosswind. What are the, I'll download the JPI data to see if any of the cylinders are complaining, any of the EGTs are out of whack. And then, you know, if it happened to be Ken who was flying, I'll just tell him that he was flying crooked. And then I'll fly in the next time, and then of course it will all be perfect. But you know, that's just family marital humor. We tease each other like that a lot. But we'll go fly again. And if you fly in calm wind conditions, which is generally right around sunrise, you can fairly well get some good data in that environment. Now, if I were obsessing about it because we were about to compete in another pilot skilled speed air race, that would be a different story. I'd be flying the next morning, and I'd be doing all of the things that that I talked about. That's the, are you muted, CJ symbol?
The universal, good Lord, how many times do you have to tell me before I learn? Not fit to fly. No, great tips. And all of us always like to make our airplanes go faster. So it's just good to have this stuff.
And check how much weight you're carrying in additional things in the aircraft. We used to always carry around EAA spec tie downs. Well, haven't been doing that kind of flying in quite some time. So, you know, that was 5 pounds out of the rear of the aircraft. Carrying iPads really has made up for the 40 pounds of charts that we had to carry for the world race, because they're a whole lot lighter than, you know, a world race full of jet charts. All of those small and tiny things do add up. Anything that you can take out of the slipstream, like the, I credit the tiny Davtron outside air temperature, which is like 1/3 to 1/2 inch that is now mounted below our pilot window. I give it at least 1/2 knot in speed advantage compared to having the old OAT sticking out of the windshield.
Wow. All right, all of you speed demons, you ready? We're gonna, so that's it. We're ripping out our OATs that use us, that tell us when we've got ice, and we're putting in super sleek Davtron temperature gauges. And speaking of that, another question from the chat window, did you have any speed mods installed on your airframe?
Well, yes. Now, when we were racing prior to the world races, your aircraft in the competitions we were in had to be stock. So we didn't have any speed mods on there. We did, however, read our type certificate data sheet and recognize that, as an example, we could take out the headrests for the back seats. Well, they weighed, you know, we got down to that level of detail. For the world race, however, the requirements were stock engines, and after that, you could add speed mods. And that's when we went to Lopresti, who did sponsor the Twin. I think we had their first or second prototype of the Wow Cows on the Twin. We also got Knots to You gap seals. So every speed mod that was available for Twin Comanches in 1992, 1994 were on the aircraft, except the rudder gap seal. The way Mom would work on the aircraft is she would have a mod added. She would go up and test it to see if it was faster than the last time she flew. And if it wasn't, she would take it off. Now, all of them were faster than the last time they flew, except the rudder gap seals. And we don't know if that's because we're counter-rotated different airflow over the airframe, or because of the additive effect of all of the other speed mods. Wing root fairings, speed spats, trying to think of anything else. That was pretty much it at the time. We would not have put those on the aircraft because frankly, they weigh more. And it would have taken us out of being able to compete in our domestic races. However, if you're going to be competitive in an international environment, we felt it was a requirement.
Interesting to
question.
consider balancing. Yeah, no, you can thank Pat Donovan for that one. From Mr. Gibson, was any special insurance required?
The insurance that Mom carried on the aircraft did require that it was authorized to fly in foreign countries. For example, the insurance that I have today, anywhere in North America, we're good. But if I'm going to Mexico or the Bahamas now, I need to let them know and ask permission. My understanding is that's no additional cost. They just want to know. So there was no additional expense, just additional permissions for her to fly in the various countries in which we landed.
Cool. How much faster than Book was the Twin with all the mods?
Well,
if you could tell with all the fuel you were carrying.
That's what I was about to say. We don't really know because we still flight plan at 170 knots. If that tells you anything, we planned for 170 knots before. We planned for 170 knots after. But we couldn't tell you because we were flying with 252 gallons at a time. That's such an obscene number. We did average in the world race. Our average speed was 170.5 knots, or about 198 miles an hour. Pretty darn good for all those climbs to fairly high altitudes with all of that weight on board.
Well,
another
obviously quite
tip.
a lot faster.
Let me add one other thing to people who want to fly efficiently. Remember all that time that I spent on the center of gravity and weight and balance?
Yeah.
Oh, there are a lot of people who will say, "Oh, you need to add weight aft. You need to add weight forward." And folks were just astonished that, and I know Hans in particular advocates moving the battery to the back. Well, sort of depends upon what your pilots weigh. If you happen to be on the short side of the world, which Mom was, and I am an average female, and in the United States at 5'4". But I am less than the average male. So we have a weight advantage, and it makes our weight and balance different. For years, we raced, and if we raced an aircraft other than a Comanche, we would put, for example, 50 pounds of rock salt. We were living in Chicago at the time. It was an easy thing to come by. We'd put 50 pounds of rock salt as far aft as we could get it and see if we flew faster. Well, none of the Comanches that we raced, not the 260B, not the 400 that we raced, or the B model Twin Comanche or our Twin Comanche, raced faster with that type of loading. However, we did race a Myers 200D that was faster if we carried 50 pounds of rock salt as far aft as we could get it. And that was what won us the 1976 Quebec City to Fort Lauderdale, Florida air race. So it depends on how heavy are your pilots, where is the weight distribution in your aircraft, and the closer you can get it to having your weight and balance and your center of gravity centered, generally, the faster you will go. And of course, there are the little flying techniques, you know, put it up on a step. If you're climbing to 7,000 feet, climb to 7,050 feet and the descend back down to 7. You will go and not faster. Or at least we did.
We need to have a big, no, we actually need to have a big Comanche Zoom on getting an aircraft on the step. Having just flown across the United States and back in the 180, pretty close to gross, and with a generator and 4 gallons of water and a case of oil and everything else in the baggage area. I was playing with that, getting up on the step, and I'm not skilled enough to just climb 50 feet and accelerate coming back down. But if I bust my altitude by more like 150, it does come down and end up going faster. So, but the other thing I discovered as a just average pilot is that when somebody really skilled flies a particular airplane, they fly at a knot to 2 knots faster than I do all day.
Oh my gosh, that was another one of the stories that the fellow who did Mom's Memorial Service orchestrated it was a fellow that had competed as a pilot with me. I taught him how to air race, and he subsequently ended up buying a 172 RG, which he then raced. And he was working on getting it in good rig and so forth. So he asked Mom to come and fly with him. And so at her funeral, he's going, and yes, she did. She flew my own aircraft 3 knots faster than I could. I can learn from that woman. And all she said was, well, Jerry, practice.
That is perfect. Pete Morse and I and a couple other folks put together the Fly Share program, by the way. So for those going to fly-ins, especially given that we have 6 emerging around the country, especially if it's affordability or just a feeling like, boy, I'm a little rusty. When you sign up for these fly-ins, and we'll have all of them listed, say you've got a seat available or that you'd like a seat, and we'll try to help people find each other. And then you can do these little experiments like, okay, if I fly the airplane, of course, flying from the right seat is different, but it's still interesting to see if you can fly the airplane at the same speed as the other guy when you're both trying to do it as well as possible, and you learn. So sorry to break into your Zoom, Pat, but that's it's been just a real learning experience.
I think that's an important point. And one of the things that I want to specifically share is that, yeah, I have this fabulous FAI gold medal, and I had this amazing experience, and I did all of that stuff. But I'm here to tell you, I can get just as rusty as the next pilot. So I go to things like Larry Larkin's 3-day Twin Comanche course, and then I reprised it again when Zach brought it to Lancaster, Texas. And when I am feeling like, you know, I really haven't practiced any engine out lately, I call up Larry Ratliff, our local Comanche instructor, and I said, you know, I need you to come out and fail some engines on me. So I'm in fact current and proficient. And the husband does the same thing. So the consequence was, when we had an engine failure on departure last February, Ken handled it perfectly.
Wow.
Just perfectly. But it's only when you practice. You can't just say, well, it's like a bicycle, you know, I'll get back to it when I can, and 6 months later expect to be as proficient as you were when you took your last check ride. So I'm here to tell you, I work at it, and I need to work at it just like every other pilot does.
What was the cause of the engine failure?
There's a very long story of 156 posts on the Delphi forum. I will net it out as, in my opinion, the people who overhauled the fuel servo had left debris in it.
Okay, that's unfortunate. And with the fuel that you have on board the Twin, have you just, you said you had a 90-day STC or clearance from the FAA? for
The FAA,
road?
when you're, I believe it's fairly standard. This is the only one and only time I had a ferry tank on. The FAA approved the aircraft to be over gross for 90 days. And after that, that approval expires.
And
And sort of an interesting story
exactly-
about that. The ferry tank was sponsored by Brinks International. I think I have the name, Brent's International out of Oakland, California. So they installed the tank there, and we were not going to make it operational until it got back to Fort Worth, Texas. Well, FSDO and on the coasts are a lot more comfortable with approving overgross aircraft because they do it all the time for ocean crossings. But we're fairly well landlocked in Fort Worth, Texas, and our mechanic sent over the proper paperwork, and FSDO declined. So when I say it was the last minute before we got everything together for the world race, even after all of these years of experience and 11 months of planning, it was 2 days prior to departure before Mom was able to get a scheduled meeting with FSDO. And what she did is she walked them through the fuel systems of the Twin Comanche and how it operated during the 1992 world race. It was about an hour-long conversation where she did most of the talking, and at the end, they approved the ferry tank installation from the Fort Worth FSDO. Otherwise, you know, I wouldn't be talking here today.
We've got a pretty interesting question from Mark Sullivan via Maurice Taylor, who said Maurice Taylor told him on a telephone conversation about whether to convert his 1966 PA-30 to a counter-rotating, that the counter-rotating models are across the board slower because of the fuselage interference of both props rather than one. Do you have any information on this?
That is absolutely correct. That is absolutely correct. The PA-39 is slower than any PA-30 that is not counter-rotated. And how do we know this? Well, we learned to fly, and who was it that was here from Poplar Grove Airport? We learned to fly at Elgin Airport in Elgin, Illinois, before it became a mixed-use development at Route 31 and I-90. The FBO there was a Piper dealer distributor. So when we say that we have handmade aircraft, whenever they got a new airplane, Mom would go out because she worked for them as an instructor part-time. She would go out and she would assess how fast that airplane was. So she tested every Twin Comanche that came through there and every single engine aircraft that came through there. And she knew that the PA-30B model with a thinner stabilator was hands down the fastest thing in the Chicago area. And that's why we borrowed the one aircraft, because it was a B model, it had better handicap. So out comes this PA-39. Now, I worked for IBM in sales and marketing. And if you're bringing out the latest and greatest computer or the latest and greatest airplane, are you going to want to say, gee golly, I'm sorry, it's a knot slower, but it's our best. You really need to buy it. So they came out, and the PA-39 book speeds were, you know, characterized by Piper as being a knot faster, when in fact they were a knot slower. So whoever asked that question is absolutely correct. Maurice was, of course, correct. Oh, and I should comment on our, because Maurice Taylor is the one who fixed it, on our intermittent green gear light. The first time that we had ever seen that was, in fact, on the air race. And we saw it more than once. So we come back and we try and reproduce this problem. Couldn't reproduce it. It occasionally happened, but You know, we'd recycle and then it would be fine for eons. And of course, it never did it when the mechanic was on board. It wouldn't do it on the ground. It wouldn't do it when the mechanic was in the airplane. So then mom passes and she gifted me the airplane. I'd rather have her, but we've done our best to take good care of the airplane. And Ken and I grew a little frustrated with this intermittent gear light thing. So I finally called up Maurice Taylor and said, Maurice, oh, and by the way, we put in Matt Kirk's gear harness. It wasn't as nice as it is today, but we changed the wiring. We changed everything that we knew to change. I called Maurice, and bless his heart, he said, should have called me first. I would have told you. It's the nose gear contact. And I'm going, really? So sure enough, we went out and checked that, and it was just a little bit off, by golly. So we fixed that, and it was solid for a number of years. And then we started having intermittent problem again. Well, it can't be the nose gear contact. We've already replaced that. So we replaced the rest of them. Well, that was stupid because it was, once again, the nose gear contact. I don't know why, but it just is. It's like when the left alternator fails. It's almost always because the wires become detached. You know, the one that you can't see? I don't know why that is either. But it's only on the left engine. Right engine never does that. Just my 2 cents of 31 years of being around the twin. 51 years of being around the twin.
Wow. And I'm just gonna jump forward in the question thing just to Mark's comment that Maurice Taylor also pointed out that the thinner stabilator was a speed enhancer of
Yes,
the
it was.
P30. Does anybody know, and forgive me, I'm going to throw one in there. Does anybody, why was the thicker stabilator required or added by Piper for the PA39?
Stall characteristics is my understanding. At the time that Twin Comanches were being used for training aircraft, the FAA requirements were to do engine outs at obscenely slow and low speeds. So when they did them below the best single engine rate of climb, there were a lot of twins that were auguring in, to the extent that the United States Congress was calling Piper on the carpet. And they asked mom to testify. And her testimony was obviously prepped by the attorneys. And she said, no, it's really very simple. If you respect the speeds of the aircraft as published by Piper, you will not have a problem. Now imagine a 5 foot tall woman, well, okay, she was 5'2", sitting in front of Congress and saying, guys, just not a problem. You just need to pay attention to what Piper tells you. Well, by then the Susquehanna had the ice flows back up the river, the plant had flooded, and it became a moot point. But en route to that time frame, that's my understanding of when the thicker stabilator came out in the C models for the PA30s and in the 39, as well as the stall strips for the 39.
Oh, interesting. We need to have a history of the Twin Comanche Zoom, where people like you and others can just talk, because some of
I'd
it's
like to say
captured,
I
but
wasn't
think-
born yet, but you know, that's really not true. I wasn't flying yet, but I did pay attention to dinner table conversations.
Quick question on a stabilator. Did you say the thicker stabilator is on later models of the 30 as well?
Yes, PA30C model has the thicker stabilator.
All the C's. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. I just want to read a quip just because it's funny before I go back to the fuel question. The FAA is not happy until you're not happy.
Well, I actually have a different perspective on that. Because I ran a decade's worth of air races, I found the FAA to be one of my best buddies. I reviewed all of the procedures for every airport that we did low passes over at 200 feet AGL. And we selected 200 feet AGL because most instrument approaches will allow you to descend to that level. And we only flew in VFR conditions. Consequently, when we got a noise complaint in Cincinnati, is it Cincinnati? Yeah, Cincinnati. The FSDO folks called me up and I explained the process that we had gone through with one of their colleagues, not the person who had gotten the phone call. And oh, Dan already reviewed this? We're good with that. So over my flying career, I have found the FAA to be very helpful. They are not, however, omnipotent when it comes to each and every aircraft and each and every pilot. And sometimes things have to be explained to them. Like I said, Mom explained for an hour and they approved.
Yep. And I will just take a moment to say that all of you who've been here for a lot of this series know that the FAA's supported with wings credit and said, you know, get the stuff in and we will continue to do the wings credit. We've been remiss. And then have actually sent people to present on some pretty crazy topics. So it's been a good relationship. The new, kinder, gentler FAA is a real credit. And the fact that under the new, kinder, gentler provisions for pilots, where they're really encouraging people to, you know, put in those reports and learn from each other, the accident rates have fallen. So it seems to be working.
That's awesome.
Oh yeah, that's amazing. Were there fumes of fuel from the ferry tanks that drove you crazy on the flight?
Not in this race. It was properly installed and vented. There was a problem with a roll your own ferry tank in the 1990 vintage air rally, where Mom was flying a 1949 V-tail Bonanza. She had two other 99s flying with her. So she took it solo across the Atlantic and removed that ferry tank, but kept all of the fuel fittings. She wasn't quite sure why she did that, but she did keep all of the fuel fittings. So they're flying from London to Sydney, Australia to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the first air service along that route. And they're in Calcutta. They cannot get permission to land in Burma/Myanmar. Oh, surprise. So in order to overfly that location, they needed more fuel. So what did Mom do? She went into the Calcutta marketplace and she bought a trash can. She took the trash can and the fuel fittings from the prior ferry tank to the airport, and with a translator, enabled the mechanics to install that in the fuselage of the V-tail Bonanza. That was not as well vented. And Samon McKay, who sat next to it in the second set of seats, got quite a headache. But it did allow them to continue on the event.
That's ingenuity.
Oh, yes.
Yep.
So no trouble in our installation at all.
Nice.
70 knots, what fuel burn and power settings? What percent power?
Well, we were flying at maximum manifold pressure. Now at 9,000 feet, that is nowhere near 26, 27 inches. It's more like 20, 22. However, we were at 2,700 RPM on our props, as opposed to normally we fly at 24 square. So at that configuration, our fuel burn was generally in the 22 gallons per hour.
Thank you.
Amazing. Back to stabilators, just to read a couple more comments into the group because I think we'll find them interesting. The thin stabilator caused the so-called slam dunk landing that the Comanche is somewhat known for, which is fixed in this PA-30B drivers with the wing root fairings, which made a huge difference. And then the follow-on note that the thicker stabilator made the C model easier to land. And then a question, Newbert noted that the front doors on Mark's PA-30B don't close absolutely flush, but yours did. How did you fix that?
The passenger door?
No, I think it's the front gear doors, the nose gear doors.
Oh, the front gear doors. Well, of course. We worked on the gear doors a great deal because, of course, you know, otherwise they hang out there and create drag. And it's a matter of a mechanic doing a very good job and adjusting the rods appropriately. Not so much that they close on a larger tire so that you get tire burn on the inside, but enough so that they do close and do close flush.
Mark, does that answer your?
Yes, it does, except that the magic is getting that rod adjustment right. It's devilish. It is devilish to get it zeroed in.
Well, yes, and we also, Mark, spent some time with our up limit switch as well. You want the gear to come all the way up and be snug, but you don't want that gear limit switch out of adjustment so that your motor gets additional stress on it.
One thing Hans came up with, which I thought was a kind of a clever idea. If you're familiar with the Lopresti gear fairing, the Lopresti gear fairing, rather than going leading edge to trailing edge, nice and slick looking, it's like a lip, and apparently aerodynamically, that little lip that Lopresti uses is just as effective, if not more effective, than the Knots to U one that goes from, that looks, you know, to a non-aerodynamic engineer, looks like it'd be better. But in any event, Hans suggested in the right at the leading edge of the front gear doors that I could, if I wanted to make it out of fiberglass or some of the material, about a 1/4 inch high little curled lip, just like the Lopresti ones use on the gear, would probably solve that. So when they get out of adjustment at all, you wouldn't have that interference. I haven't done it yet, but seemed like an ingenious idea. And when it comes to speed, I always ask Hans first.
Oh gosh, I love Hans. I got a tour of his engine cowl, and I was just drooling because of the attention to detail. I'm not a mechanic. I know I don't have that skill set, but I do know awesome work when I see it. And thanks to Hans, the inside of our cowls are now painted white. And if you haven't done that, from a problem determination viewpoint, completely awesome. You get a little drop of oil. Well, where did that come? Well, you can trace it back. It's so much faster and easier. The other thing that I got from Hans was the cowl savers. The flexible baffles. I got them from McFarland. I went with Teflon, and there have been a couple of schools of thought on the more flexible baffle or the Teflon McFarland baffle, which is a little bit more rigid. But we made them almost 3 inches long and then mitered the corners, and RTV is your friend to make sure that you seal all of those gaps. And then as good as ours became, I got 50-degree reduction in temperatures. Kristen Winters are better. She refers to it as being tighter than a frog's butt. And she did, well, Kristen just has a way with words. So She went all across the back where there are multiple planes of intersection of the flexible baffle. And she essentially fabricated it so that it came across as one smooth piece of baffle. So when she came to visit, when she was here for an aviation attorney conference, you know, she flew into the airport, and of course I didn't clean the house, but I did clean the hangar and the airplane before she came. And then we're on the ramp. She's doing show and tell on Maggie. I'm doing show and tell on our twin. It was just sort of like, and we all met on the internet. So, you know, there are some relationships that start on the internet and are good ones.
You know, at that point, the other thing that Hans mentioned is on the turbos, that painting the white really makes a difference because it reflects off the heat. He said it was dramatic improvement on the turbos. Yeah. He also espouses the guy that's got the STC on the Ray J turbos has these molded, they're, you know, aerospace technology type of foam. It feels like nothing. It's a foam that's molded to fit exactly the shape of a Ray J. And the good news is if it's right over the Ray J and it just absolutely kills the heat, the bad news is he's charging $450 each for a part that can't cost more than $10 to make. But Hans swears by it as being a huge performance increase because it keeps the engine temperature down, and you just get, you know, without the heat, you get even more boost out of it. He did it to a friend's turbo, and he said it really made a difference.
Well, the vast majority of our flying is landing and departing at airports that are 600 feet MSL. And even when we do go into the Rockies, we only fly in the mornings, and we just don't have any trouble getting ourselves in and out of the Rocky Mountains. So after that, for our mission, turbos are not something that we would choose to install. For other people, I think that they are tremendously useful. And it gave me a real ego boost once. This is the Zach Grant story when he was organizing the 50 for 50 in 2008 fly-in to Oshkosh. He said, we want to fly it at this speed, and for most twins, that will be probably right around 19 or 20 inches of manifold pressure. And I'm going, really? To get that, I really only need 16 inches. Oh, wow. Is my twin actually better than Zach Grant's twin? No, that was the difference between a turbo and a normally aspirated airplane at flying at 2,000 feet. But I was excited there for a few minutes.
Funny. Just throwing a couple more comments in for those who can't see the chat window from Howard, that he had read somewhere that they use the words, the thicker stabulator is more effective, close quote, I think with respect to forward center of gravity and Twin Comanche. Chris Elgar, do you want to go ahead and jump in, or do you want me to read it off?
Yeah, no, I was just wondering, what was the total hours that your mother had before she passed? It must have been a lot.
Well, she quit keeping a logbook after a while. She just didn't quite see the purpose. She flew from age 39 to age 70, and she had north of 5,000 hours.
Oh, wow. Hmm.
Nothing compared to Edna Gardner-White at 30,000 hours. But then again, Edna was a professional aviator, and Mom flew for business reasons. As I said, they actually bought the Twin Comanche in support of our equestrian business. And they only got a twin engine because they thought customers would feel more comfortable if they were going to fly with them, if there were two engines out there. And so she actually became, if you will, the corporate pilot for our equestrian business, and often flew while my dad was a qualified pilot. If he was working with a client and they were entertaining that client, obviously, Dad would likely have a mixed beverage in the 60s. And so he needed a dry pilot to fly him home. Oh, Mom was so disappointed that she had to do that, you know?
That's great.
It really is. Go ahead,
By the way,
everybody.
I also assume the thick stabilator, it's probably no coincidence. They went to the thick stabilator a year after they came up with the idiotic idea of a 6-place Comanche requiring the battery to go forward, with the forward CG, which made the slam dunk even worse. And I'm thinking the thick stabilator may have been put in there, not everybody lived with the slam dunk before, but when you had the battery up front, then it really was, every landing was a slam dunk, unless you made it just perfectly. And lo and behold, a year later, they thicken up the stabilator. Just a guess. I don't know if anybody knows there's a connection there, but I know that stabilator, once the wing root fairings went on, it was like a totally different airplane landing.
John Brierton, who is the Piper Air Museum master, might actually know, because John joined Piper in 1960. I think he went full time in 64 or 5, and he worked on the B models. And of course, although he told me that his primary work had been on the 260B, and then that was used for the twins, right?
Yes.
So maybe he was involved. Kristen Winter had suggested that we bring him back. He actually has presented on a Comanche Zoom, if anybody wants to go back and look at the recordings, to talk some more about the Piper Museum. And at that time, I wonder if we could talk more about the twin B and C models. So there's a lot of stuff that's come up right now. Interesting.
Someone came into our shop with a 6-seat twin Comanche. I looked at it. It is the most preposterous thing I've ever seen. I mean, you'd have to have 2 4'1" midgets in the back. Even a 5-year-old would have trouble sitting back there. I don't know what they were thinking.
Well, they actually had folks like our family in mind. My dad was 5'8". My mom was 5'2". And when they purchased the twin Comanche in 1970, we had, 22, 20, 18, and 15-year-olds. So none of us were really very tall. And we did, in fact, fly, all 6 of us, in the twin Comanche. Now, a couple years later, as we grew and gained weight, as children are wont to do, we would take out the back seats, use it for baggage, and send 2 of the kids on a commercial airline. So it sort of depends upon how big are your people. I will tell you that if you go skiing for a day from Chicago to Upper Michigan in Boyne Mountain, and you draw the short straw and have to be in the what we refer to as the way back, or the 3rd row of seats, you aren't going to get a lot of heat. So, bring an extra layer of thermal underwear. Can you tell I drew that short straw once?
Yeah.
I was just hearing about a twin Comanche that got really, really dolled up. Only apparently the useful load when it had full fuel was 0. I'm trying to remember which one it was. No. By the way, I should note that it's 9:57. So I wanted to do a huge thank you to everybody, particularly obviously to Pat for making an absolutely amazing presentation. I'm going to go ahead and keep the Zoom open, but for those that are recording, I know there's usually an hour of post-processing, so we'll probably wrap up the recording at 10. I'm going to throw the floor open.
Well, I also want to say thank you, CJ, again, for you and your team putting together all of these Zooms, and for all of the excellent questions that we got this evening. So I think we all learn from one another.
Well, I will say back to you when we first started. So not everybody knows this. When we first started trying to figure out how to do these Comanche Zooms, we reached out to Pat Keefer because of that 30 years of marketing experience and the passion for the Piper Comanche, and the format and a lot of the well, the cheerful acknowledgement that we were making it up as we went along and getting better as we went is courtesy to Pat Keefer's marketing experience and savvy. So thank you right back. It's been a great, huge group of people that have made this all happen, and the credit goes all over the place. It's amazing. Just want to read a comment, and in part because Hans Newbert, who presented at ComancheTown along with Zach Grant on speed and efficiency mods. First of all, Howard put in, Hans gets incredible speeds. He's the maestro, and his cowl baffles are like crazy beautiful. Spoken like a true airplane nut. But Hans is going to go ahead and give the presentation that he gave at ComancheTown on speed and efficiency mods in a Comanche Zoom coming very soon. And his Comanche, he says, is 25 miles an hour faster than Book. He's the one that keeps getting told off for catching up to Cessna Conquest.
I think about this point, I'm going to end the recording. This will be available on the website later tomorrow. I have to get home so I can get to the other computer first. But sometime later in the day tomorrow, this will all be available on the recording, so you can go back and relive this amazing evening. And with that, I'm going to end the recording and say good night.